Thank you for everyone coming today. I'd like to call to order this, let's see, what month are we in? November meeting of the Northern New Mexican Citizens Advisory Board. The designated federal official to the Department of Energy, Lee Bishop. It's my pleasure to turn this over to the new chair, Doug Sayer. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Happy to have all you here. Glad to see all your smiling faces and everything. Try to get that close enough so you can hear me, hopefully. At this time, we'd like to have Lieutenant Governor Max Ortiz give us a kind of a welcome talk, if you would, Max.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Max Ortiz, Second Lieutenant Governor. Our Governor, Marcelino Owingeh, is in Washington. Our First Lieutenant is in Isleta Casino at another conference. So I guess you can say I got left with holding the bag. But anyway, I'm glad to be here, and I want to welcome you all to Ohkay Owingeh. And as with our tradition in all our meetings before we begin, we start with a traditional blessing and invocation. So with that, I'll do it in my language. Era on beaginde, no en it he gaucho na nandiwe, ne Ohkay Owingeh na nandiwe, ke wai chandiwe, winget to we na. No, the Owingeh so he will guy no it on Santa Ari Mupin, Santa Ari Popin, no, Hohake, no, or the man he won in Ansha, he won in Bombay, no, and when he won onion, he won in Bombay, the man he won in Ansha, Hohake, no, the man he had, he won the heap, he won the, I wouldn't call the puri, nowhere. Mr. Yosef Reina Moy, yeah, make Conquandina Moy, no, and then once I out of here, one what to happy a Chani. What to how to get it? No, we see money we second and money here. Okay, thank you very much. And like I said, I want to welcome all of you. And I know some of you, I read the agenda briefly, and I guess you're all the way from Taos to Albuquerque. And I don't know if you've been here before, but if not, well. Just want to welcome all of you again, and I hope whatever you want to talk about or decide, or whatever you want to resolve comes with a great spirit, that they help you with your whatever your brains, your thoughts will all come together as one, so you'll become all one. That's our way of thinking when we meet like this, that we all resolve in a timely manner. Anyway, the other thing with, as like I said, I've been pretty busy myself, and we've just had a death in the Pueblo, and I've got to go on to the morgue right now to go pick up the body and escort it down to the Pueblo. And I was telling Mr. Bishop here that it kind of hit close to our home. It's the son of one of our council members, quite young man, but he's so. We're kind of heavy-hearted at this moment at the council, and it's kind of gloomy around there. But I hope with whatever issues you have, you come to a reasonable resolve. So again, welcome all, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Max, we certainly appreciate you doing this for us, coming before us and giving us a good introduction, and also hopefully we'll take that in mind and what we're considering. We probably need to have him go before the state and the feds if we can all think as one body and get together like that. I guess at this time, we need to go to roll call. William? Excuse me. Okay. Thank you. You want to start with me and go around the table? Okay. I'll start with me, and we'll go this way and all the way around and back. My name's Doug Sayer. I'm from Santa Fe, and I'm the current new chair. Thank you.
Manise Santisteban, Executive Director of the Board. I'm from Taos.
Alex Puglisi, Alex Puglisi. Is this on? Yeah. Alex Puglisi, Santa Fe. I'm also an employee of the City of Santa Fe Environment Department and also the Source of Supply Manager.
Carlos Valdez, former Santa Fe member, now currently Albuquerque member.
Stephen Schmeling, CAB member from Santa Fe and also chair of the Environmental Monitoring and Remediation Committee.
Alyssa Schreiber. I'm a student liaison to the CAB and from the lab.
I'm Deidre Roybal, and I'm a student at Ohkay High School, and I'm also a student at the lab.
I'm Savannah Martinez, and I'm a student at the lab and at Ohkay High School.
Gerard Martinez, Santa Fe Community College and Santa Fe.
Electric back there.
Mary Friday from Taos.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Valerio from Taos, new CAB member. Thank you for having me here, Mr. Sayer. We didn't meet last time, but this is my second meeting, so good to meet you.
Glad to have you. Appreciate you coming and being with us. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Danny Mayfield from the Nambe-Powak area, and congratulations, Mr. Chairman. Now I know why you're wearing a tie.
Good afternoon. Joey Tiano, Santa Fe CAB.
Good afternoon, everyone. Manuel Pacheco, Waste Management Chair and resident of Ranchos de Taos and Corrales, New Mexico.
Dual citizenship. Thank you, everyone.
Want to try that again?
That work?
How about that? All right. I'm J.R. Strobel with the DOE Carlsbad Field Office, and I'm here to provide the WIP recovery update presentation today.
Very good. Well, thank you. William, I take it that we have a quorum? Yeah, I was going to do that, but we do have a quorum. Okay. At this time, I'd like to recognize any of the people in the public, back part of the room, if they would introduce themselves. We'd appreciate that.
Christina Houston, alternate DDFO. Patty Jones, Los Alamos National Lab.
Thank you. Okay. Certainly appreciate everybody coming before us today. At this time, I guess we can move on to part of the agenda. And so I guess you have an agenda before you. Are there any considerations about changes or modification of that? If not, we consider, I guess, approval of the
Mr. Chair,
agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
It's been motioned, and do I hear a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded by Danny over there, about approval of the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Any nays? Okay, thank you. Also, the next item on the agenda is, well, on this is the approval of the minutes of September 24th. If you've had a time, been able to look those over, and hopefully you can check that out, and if there's any changes, advise us, but at this time we'd probably look at a motion to
Approve, Mr. Chair.
approve that minutes. Do I hear a second? It's been motioned by Manuel.
Oh,
Did I hear a second? Dan, okay, sorry, I was waiting. Okay. No, not hearing any changes to the minutes of September 24th. Can we have a vote? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. So it passes. At this time, I guess we have old business. We have some written reports that we need to look at. Those here, Manise, the written reports?
Yes.
The orange sheets? Oh, very good. Thank you. So, you know, you have the executive director's report. Do you want to go ahead and give that, Manise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your first meeting.
Thank you.
Our Vice Chair, Allison Major, was unable to be here today, and she did send her regrets. Something came up at home. So I do have a report in your packet. It's on your orange sheet. We wanted to give you a little update on board membership. Our package to headquarters will go in this week probably, or next week, early next week. We've got the governor of Jemez Pueblo has said that he would like to serve on the board, Mr. Joshua Madalena. So he will submit his nomination. Also, a young man who works for the state, and Lee's going to interview him tomorrow. So we'll have 2 new members in the springtime. Mr. Villarreal, Bob Villarreal's last meeting was last week. A lot of us said farewell and thank you to him last week at the committee meeting. So right now we have 19 members, and in the springtime, hopefully we'll have 21 members. We're always looking for new people, especially women. So if you know of anyone, please let me know, and we'll follow up with those folks. We are planning for your 2015 Fall Chairs meeting. You are hosting, as reminder, in September of 2015, La Fonda. You will be hosting the 7 other Citizens Advisory Boards from across the DOE complex. The chairs and vice chairs of those boards and their staff and people from headquarters will all be in Santa Fe. We will tour Los Alamos National Laboratory on September 1st. Patty Jones has already prepared a draft agenda for that, and we have already met, and we're starting our planning for that. We're holding another planning meeting on Thursday, tomorrow. So we're all on our way, Mr. Chairman. I think it's going to be a nice event. So we're working hard at that. Other than that, the board is, moving along. We're making arrangements for all of your venues for next year. We've already got our 2015 calendar pretty much set, and we'll send that out to you so that you can get that on your calendars for the bi-monthly meetings. We do not have meetings that I know of in December. There's always a possibility of a special meeting being called, but as far as I know, we don't have anything on the books for December. And thank you for coming early for this meeting. Next week would have been problematic. So if you have any questions, please let me know. We do expect some folks to be arriving a little late. Mona, Varela, and Irene Sepe. So it was just a lot of meetings going on today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Manise. We appreciate that. It's interesting when you go to these national meetings, the people you talk to, it's a good chance to meet and find out what some of the other boards are considering and what they're doing. But anytime you mention Santa Fe and Los Alamos, they welcome coming over here. So I look forward to a lot of interesting people coming here in September for the national board meeting. That ought to be real interesting. And I think it's nice that Manise was able to line up La Fonda, because it's kind of a fun downtown area to meet in, and I think everybody enjoys that. So hopefully things will go well about that. I guess you talked about upcoming meetings, and I see in January we have January 14th, the executive and combined meeting. That will be at Ohkay there, and then we have the bi-monthly meeting in the Cities of Gold Conference Center on the 28th of January. So put those dates for January so we get lined up on those. At this time, any other items that we need to bring up to consider just for old business? Anybody like to bring up? I can't think of any myself.
Mr. Chairman.
Danny?
Thank you. Excuse me. Was there a discussion that we might just do one meeting a month at our last combined meeting? We would entertain that for next year?
I'm sorry.
To have both the combined committee meetings and the monthly meeting just on one given day of every month?
You mean like some certain day?
Yeah, like say in the morning we had our combined meetings, and then in the afternoon we had our standing meeting. I thought we had a little discussion about that. Maybe it was just some private discussion.
That's interesting. I don't know. Maybe I don't remember having that. We talked about separating the combined meeting, with the different committees, somewhat separation, but we generally have kept it, bi-monthly. It's the off month from the meeting month that we usually have these meetings. But I guess we could certainly consider that. But that makes it kind of a whole day that we'd be there. Is that right? Is that what you were thinking, Danny? Okay.
Yes, and I thought we had some discussion. Maybe I'm thinking of another word that I said. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. It may have been, but I was saying you need to jog my memory a lot to make me remember, but I don't remember that discussion in particular. Yeah. Manuel, you'd like to go?
Mr. Chair,
recognize.
The idea was brought up the same time that it was brought up about splitting apart the combined portion of it. From what I recall, it would have been too much of a day for some of the members that do work, I don't want to say gainfully employed. But it was brought up, the fact that, okay, let's have the committee meeting, say around 10 o'clock to about 12 o'clock, and then have the regular board meeting after that. But the consensus was that it would have been just too long of a day to take away from work. But it was mentioned, and again, like I said, it was brought up with the discussion about splitting the two committees again. FYI.
Thank you, Manuel. We could probably have that discussion again at January 14th meeting, and just to see if there's any interest in that again by the board members. But that we could put that on the agenda for consideration. But it does seem like it would make it a rather long meeting for the whole day. Some of us can obligate that, but other of us probably would have a problem with devoting quite that much time. Thank you. Any other comments about that? I guess other items, we've kind of covered that. I guess we can go to new business at this time. Why don't we have consideration and action on the committee work plans. Those have been put in front of you by the two committees, the Environmental and Restoration Remediation Committee, and that one's up on the board right now. So maybe, Steve, you would like to comment and have some comment on that? Yeah, by the way.
This paper is the work plan for FY15 for the Environmental Monitoring and Remediation Committee. It's been worked on now for several months. The committee met at the last meeting, and there was only one change put in at the meeting a week ago, and that was at the request of the Waste Management Committee. We added something about work in technical area 49 on characterizing and remediating technical area 49. The plan is in many ways similar to last year's, but they made a few changes. One of them was to try to put about 6 priority areas and put those up front. So if somebody only wants to read the first page, they've gotten through the important stuff. So, and then the rest of it is, we're focusing on groundwater, surface water and stormwater, air quality, the consent order, the parts that apply to this committee, and other issues of importance. Last week, we had a very nice presentation from
Danny Katzman.
Danny Katzman, knew the Danny part, on the impact, the potential impact of groundwater in particular on the Buckman well field for the city of Santa Fe. And I think that's very much in keeping with the mission of this committee in terms of environmental monitoring. The upshot of his report was they've done an awful lot of work, and many other people have, and there's really very little evidence, if any, that Santa Fe's water supply in the Buckman well field is being in any way impacted by the lab. So, do we need to vote on this? Okay.
That would be what we need to probably go and do is consider it. Is there any other comment by any individual board members? Carlos?
I guess just a fiscal year correction maybe. On number 5B, I think FY14 is over already. That probably should be FY15.
It absolutely should be.
Yep.
It's like so
Good
many
point,
of these
good
things.
point. Thank you.
15 people read it and don't see it, and the 16th person looks at it,
Okay.
and jumps right out. Thank you.
5B, it's changed to FY15. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's agreeable, probably. Okay. Thank you, Carlos. Alex, at this time, would you want to look at comment?
On the work plan under 3A, I would just like to add a couple of words to that. The impacts of Llano drainage on the Rio Grande, particularly the Buckman direct diversion. I would like to add and state surface water quality standards. And the reason for that, Mr. Chair, is that in past 305B reports to Congress, which list impaired waters for the state of New Mexico, the state identified some impairment below Los Alamos and Pueblo Canyons with respect to PCBs.
Okay. Thank you. Would you read that comment again, Alex, just for make sure that
yes.
William gets it correctly?
So I would just
And
like
I
to
do.
add to the end of the sentence under 3A to say the Buckman direct diversion and state surface water quality standards.
Okay. I think that's acceptable. Is that acceptable to everybody? Sounds reasonable. Okay, thank you. Well, at this time, I guess I'd entertain a motion to accept the 2015 work plan for the Environmental Monitoring and Remediation Committee.
Mr. Chair, I so move with the changes.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
That we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion about this? At this time, I entertain, we go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor? Excuse me? I'm sorry, who gave a second? Was it? Danny did? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. At this time, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of accepting the work plan with the changes by Carlos and Alex, and a little bit by Steve, vote aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, it passes. Thank you. I guess now we can consider the other work plan, and I'll turn the program over to Manuel to discuss the Waste Management Committee work plan. for
Mr. Chair.
2015.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen, before you is the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board Waste Management Committee 2015 Work Plan for consideration and approval. This is the finalized version, which I guess you could say we got all the bugs out of it at last week's combined committee meeting. And as we all know, it is a living document. We will look at any issues, if any, based on the March timeline. So with that, I move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Manuel. Do I have a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there any discussion about the work plan before you? Modification, changes, considerations? If not, take a vote. All those in favor of the 2015 work plan presented by the Waste Management Committee, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, which I'm glad there's none. Let's appreciate that. Well, it's good that we finally adopted those. I appreciate the committee's taking a lot of effort to work on these plans and get them in what I consider, I guess, priority shape for consideration, because the work plans have been around and we sort of let them ride, I guess, kind of go to the next year without too much changes. And I think that this year the committees took a good hard look at them and tried to update them fairly well to what we thought was going to be needed for the 2015 year. Thank you. Any other items for new business? Well, at this time, I think we're moving right along. We could go ahead and look for an update from the Lee Bishop, the DDFO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to be probably a pretty good meeting today. We've got some guests that are going to cover a lot of the topics I typically cover. Mr. Strobel's here from the WHIP Carlsbad Field Office, representing the WHIP facility. He'll give us an update this evening on, what's going on there, the recovery plan. So you guys can't pick on me today with that. You'll have to pick on JR a little bit with that. Pete Majari is flying back in from D.C. today. He should be on the ground and is racing from Albuquerque as we speak. He'll be here later today to give you an update, and we are expecting Secretary Flynn to be here as well. So the majority of what I normally speak about is I'm going to let these special guests cover today. But what I would like to mention, this is our last formal meeting for the year. Our next meeting will be in January. Notice how Manise and I keep caveating that. So we may or may not request a special meeting in December like we have in the past because of the changing events at Los Alamos. The Secretary of Environment, or Secretary of Energy himself, actually did request that a plan be developed partially based on Secretary Flynn's request that EM work be conducted by EM at Los Alamos and be separated from the NNSA work. That plan has been drafted. I have not seen a copy. I did not release it to the Waste Monitor. Someone else did. Just for the record. William, write it down. But that plan has been, draft plans presented to the Secretary. Pete may be able to speak to that this evening and talk about that, talk about the new contract that's being discussed where we'll break out all the EM work at Los Alamos and have that conducted by a separate contractor from the laboratory contractor. As far as the open recommendations for the year, the only one that we really have open at this point is the last recommendation, where you made some recommendations about the level of rigor and quality control both at Los Alamos and at the WHIP site, to the extent that that work at the WHIP site applied to Los Alamos waste to kind of keep you within the bounds of your charter. We have accepted that recommendation in whole. We have a draft. We should come out next week with a draft response to that, endorsing that recommendation. But it's an interim recommendation, it's interim endorsement and adoption at this point, only to the extent till we receive the Accident Investigation Board report, hopefully by the end of the year. Both office at Los Alamos and JR's office will be working diligently to develop corrective action plans to respond to that accident investigation report. When we do that, it's our belief that we will completely adopt your recommendation for additional rigor within those operational activities through that corrective action plan, that it'll fall right in line. So it was a good recommendation. We appreciate that, and we'll send out that interim response next week in anticipation of receiving the actual accident investigation board. Looking back this year, it's been a good year. Been a little bit of drama. If you remember, we started the year with 3706, and we had the celebration ready to go at the Ashley Pond, and we've come full circle to investigations, events, fires, operational shutdowns, and I often remind a lot of my coworkers it's real easy to judge a person by their success, but you get a much better feeling of what they're made of by their failures and how they react to that. And I would like to acknowledge my team and JR's team. I think we've stood our ground during these trying times, and you can really, again, tell a person's mettle a lot more by their challenges in life, maybe more than their successes. It's real easy to be successful and look good. It's a little tougher when you have all hell breaking loose all at once. We've lost some good members this year. They've timed out. Dr. Viriel, Mike Loya, they were kind of standing characters in the group. They'll be missed. But as we move forward, we're looking for new members. I think we've got an extremely strong and diverse board. We look forward to moving forward into the next calendar year, and your support, your advice, your recommendations, and hopefully you get as much out of this board as we do from your recommendations and your participation. So we're looking forward to it, and it's been a tough year, and that's kind of where we're at right now. So Alex, did you have a question?
I did. Could you elaborate on what you're saying when you say EM work be conducted by EM? Does that mean taken away from the current contract? And
so there was a memo issued by EM1, that's the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz, basically directing that a plan be developed that would break out the EM work, which is the TA-54, the groundwater cleanup, legacy waste, and EM scope. And that plan was to address two issues. One is the standing up of a separate federal field office operated by EM staff. And the second was a second contract type that would be executed by a separate contractor other than the lab or the NNSA contractor at the lab. It's been done at several other sites where you have multiple contractors operating at the same DOE facility. The Hanford site has the Richland office and Office of River Protection. Some of the folks, Oak Ridge Y12 has an EM operations contract doing cleanup separate from the NNSA contract operating the Y12 plant. So there's multiple examples through the complex of this happening. At this point, it's been a request from the Secretary, and we know a plan has been drafted. The contents of that plan has not been formally released.
So let me see if I got this right. It would either be DOE employees or a second contract separate from NNSA contract.
The two things, so it'd be a separate field office with DOE employees, and they would have a separate contractor or a separate contract that would do the EM cleanup. That does not preclude the current contractors from trying to win that separate contract. So certainly the Los Alamos National Security Agencies group or lands folks could bid on that work, or one of those companies that are part of that partnership could bid on that new EM work. They're not precluded, but it would be a separate contract vehicle under the authority of DOE EM employees.
Has there been any consideration to the amount of time and the delays that would be caused by transitioning this work away from one contractor, either to DOE or to another contractor, which would have to go through bid? Is that right?
Yeah, it would have to go through bid. There would be a contract transition and a workforce transition, and so it does not necessarily change any current schedules officially, but as you're aware of, when you do change out an entire contractor, there's going to be a delay at some point in time for that transition. Stephen?
Could you kind of bring us up to date on where the lab is and understanding what led to the one barrel, the failure of the one barrel and the rupture of it, and maybe what plans there are, or changes are being made to ensure that, whatever happened that time at least doesn't happen again. We've heard various reports along the way that things were, they've been working on it, but how close they are to coming to a conclusion about what happened or what needs to be done to prevent it.
So one of our guests a little later today is going to be Randy Erickson. He's the new division director for ADEP, Associates Director for Environmental Projects. He's going to have probably about a 10 or 15 minute slot to discuss exactly that. So I would prefer to defer that question for Randy when he comes in a little while, if I could, please. I think you'll get a much better answer. And back to Alex.
Can you comment on the article this morning about, well, unless you want to defer it to WIP, about the push for increased funding to open WIP again, to reopen WIP?
I think that's a rerun of what we've seen. JR, you're more than welcome to, I believe he's referring to the recent announcement that our two congressionals have asked for an additional $150 million in this budget cycle.
Yes, in general, it's nothing new. It's just a continuation of the requests that we had last year. They're carrying it forward. What is new is we're in the middle of a continuing resolution, and so additional funding for fiscal year 15 was not allocated in that continuing resolution. They're asking that additional funding be provided in a full budget for the year. So it's really just a reminder that need is still there, and the longer the delay in providing that funding, the delays in recovering the WIP repository will follow. And so, in general, our budget increase that was requested appears to be properly requested through the process, but it's not approved and allocated yet, so we're not able to spend any of the additional funding yet, and we're a couple of months into the year already.
So can I follow up on that? So you're asking, this request is to be considered outside of any continuing resolution, which it seems like we may be headed for?
This would be additional funding, yes, and if it can be obtained along with the continuing resolution funding, then we can get on with all of the recovery project. If only a portion of the funding can be obtained, then that may limit the pieces of the plan that we can work this year. The heart of the recovery plan for WIP is in FY15, and it's critical that we obtain that additional funding so that we can carry out the plan.
At this time, Manuel, you had some questions?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. JR, I noticed that this morning in the news that the congressional delegation was requesting, if memory serves me right, I believe it was in the sum of $133 million for the reopening of WIP. So I guess the question is, what made it so newsworthy this morning?
Well, you may need to ask their offices, but every time there is a budget discussion in Congress, especially during a continuing resolution time, any special funding I think in a lot of ways is newsworthy. So the current continuing resolution doesn't go very far. And so they're preparing, before the holidays hit, to talk about either another continuing resolution or a full budget. And so this is kind of an opportunity to remind folks that this need is still there, and I believe that they're just taking that opportunity.
So it's somewhat symbolic.
Again, for further clarification on, the driver behind the news article, you should probably contact their offices, but we're happy that they're speaking on our behalf and reminding folks that we still have that need, and so we fully support the congressional message that WIP is a priority, and we're glad that they're still pursuing that funding.
Thank you, Joe. At this time, I see where Michelle Hawkes-Ortiz is in the audience, and she's a representative of Senator Udall's office. Michelle, would you like to make a comment about this funding? Kind of update us about what was being considered here, if you would.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So the letter that was referred to yesterday in the press, it was $113 million above the 214 funding level. So I would wholeheartedly agree with regard to the comment that was just made that there's a lot of uncertainty related to funding over the next year. The continuing resolution that we're currently in is only good until December the 11th. And, we're hoping that a number of, we'd like to see an omnibus bill passed, and that's basically a series of separate funding bills that have a lot of detail that Senator Udall has had some input into. If Congress is not able to hammer out an omnibus, then we will go back into a continuing resolution that will carry us into the next year. And if that's not reached, then they could be looking at another government shutdown. If we are in a CR, Senator Udall is going to be pushing for something called an anomaly. And that's basically a directive that Congress gives when there is a CR and asks for a bit of a carve-out or an exception to ensure that certain work within the government is not adversely affected, that it continues. So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now, and I think the letter yesterday that was announced is an attempt to flag this very deep concern and try to maximize the chances that that funding continues in spite of all the uncertainty. I don't know if that helps, but that's the best I can explain it. We also have a copy of the press release that went out, but you all have probably seen the substance of it in the press. So, but do let me know if you want me to send it to Manise.
We appreciate that, Michelle. Thank you for the update. That was very nice. At this time, are there any other discussion that we want to have with JR about this? I think we're all just very hopeful that some of this funding does come forward and it doesn't get held up by Congress, because I know about this CR of December 11th, and that can be a cutoff date that might not be very favorable to what's going on.
So I could, Mr. Chair, to elaborate, that was a great explanation of at the higher congressional levels what's going on. What gives us a challenge at the site right now is it sounds like it's a little bit of a windfall because they tell us to spend at last year's rates as if we had the same budget as the previous year for a continuing resolution. But when you think from a management perspective, that if we continue to spend at FY13 rates and they pass a budget and we get a $20–30 million budget cut in the middle of a fiscal year, in the middle of a working year, when you're working to about a $200 million budget, taking a 10%, 15% cut is a significant cut, and we could result in work stoppage and even reductions in force and layoffs. So we're very sensitive to that. So at this point, the local Los Alamos EM program is spending very frugally, keeping everybody on staff, getting the work done that needs to be done, in an anticipation that we may have to have a reduction in funding once the budget does get passed. So it's kind of an interesting way to operate, and of course, as you go down the year, further down the year, and you get closer to the end of the year, we're getting close to the first quarter being over, starting second quarter in January, you know, you have less flexibility to recover from that. So we may actually have a windfall at the end of the year and spending and working like crazy, or we may be tightening our belt. So having that unknown at the farther you go into your working year is very challenging for us. So we are spending at a reduced rate right now in anticipation that we may end up with a reduced budget when they actually issue one, or if they issue one. And of course, we've seen years where we've gone through the entire year under a CR with no budget at all. So there's a lot of unknowns for the EM office right now locally.
But Lee, what I'm hearing is that if we're under continuing resolution, it's unlikely that WIP will be reopened next year.
I don't think you're hearing that at all.
That's not necessarily the case. It would likely slow us down in the major improvements that we need to make to the facility to make it get closer to full operation. But we do believe that even with base funding that we can work a large portion of the recovery plan. The key areas will be in the ventilation system, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we go through the presentation. But we do require additional funding to procure some major systems to supplement the ventilation system while working with a contaminated mine. And that's where the challenges will be. So if for some reason that funding doesn't come through, then we will make the adjustments necessary and do whatever we can in 15 so that we can at least start a limited operation sometime in 16.
Does that pretty well complete your presentation?
Unless someone else has any more questions, we're going to have some guests. I know we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, Mr. Chairman. I have a feeling once we have Randy from the Los Alamos group here and Secretary Flynn's office represented in Pete, that we'll probably recover our schedule at that point.
Okay. Well, at this time, as you said, we're coming a little bit ahead of schedule, so we thought we might go ahead and take a break at this time. I think we got through with our break, and that was nice. At the present time, I think we'd like to get into the meat of the meeting today with Mr. Strobel from the WIP program down in Carlsbad. So, JR, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you for discussion.
Okay, thank you. I have a presentation that's being projected onto the wall here. It may be a little difficult to see, so as I go through the presentation, if you have questions, get my attention and we'll address them at that time. I'm J.R. Strobel. I'm part of the Department of Energy's Carlsbad field office. I've been there at WIP for 24 years. And I lead the group that is responsible for interfacing with all the sites that have true waste that want to get them to WIP. And this setback that we've had in our program, although it's been disappointing, it's taught us a few new things. And as we recover the repository, we're going to incorporate as many of those lessons as we can in what we've learned. And we've also learned a lot of things with LANL. We've been working closely with LANL ever since the WIP had its issues, and we've learned a lot of things, and I still think there's some things left to learn, but we've learned enough to this point that we have a lot of plans for improvement. So today I'd like to provide you an update on where we're at with recovering the WIP repository. And so, like I said, if you have questions along the way, feel free to get my attention. We had 2 incidents earlier this year in February that caused us to shut down our operation. The first one was on February the 5th. We had a fire down in our underground mine. It was on one of our salt haul trucks, and Fortunately, everyone got out of the mine safe, but it did leave a lot of soot. It did put into question our emergency operating procedures and our ability to respond to such an emergency. So we were down, at least in the repository, on February the 14th when we sensed a release of radiation from the active disposal panel down in the mine. The ventilation system was active at the time in which we were operating and did its job. It detected the radiation and switched to high efficiency filtration and kept or contained most of the particulate that had been released from room 7 of panel 7 down in the repository. We've learned a lot about what happened in that room that evening, but we haven't learned everything. And so the Accident Investigation Board, who was tasked to independently evaluate what occurred, is still ongoing with that investigation and hopes to wrap it up soon. They had hoped to wrap it up sooner, but as most things go, the more you learn, the longer it takes to wrap it up. So if it goes well, maybe before the Christmas holiday, they'll finalize that report, but it very well could run into January. We just don't know yet. Here on the left is a picture of the salt haul truck and the tire that created most of the soot. It was actually a hydraulic or a flammable liquid fire that started it, but created the mess when the big rubber tire went up with it. Over here is the one container we've identified to date that's in room 7 of panel 7 that appears to be opened and appears to have released some of its contents, and also appears to have produced a lot of heat inside that container, because these containers, this particular one came from Los Alamos. When it went into the repository, it was painted white and the lid was closed. The white stuff on the top is magnesium oxide, which is placed in the repository on top of the stacks as the waste is in place for long-term repository performance purposes. We might have been fortunate that it was there because that product also happens to be one of the products in fire suppression systems that are used. But that wasn't its original purpose for being in there. So on February the 5th, the salt haul truck was in this portion of the mine. These are the shafts that are going to and from the surface. The mine's about 2,100 feet below the Earth's surface. It's basically just alleyways that are carved out of a big salt formation. Over here on February 14th is where the continuous air monitor was located when it sensed the release of radiation that appeared to come from the drone that was sitting in this area, which is the first room to be filled in panel 7. This picture up here, I know it's kind of hard to see on this wall, is one of the first still shots of a video that we took with a boom that was over the waste stack. And that's when we started seeing pictures of the magnesium oxide piles on top of the waste containers. These originally were placed in here in plastic bags, and the plastic bags were gone, so we knew that there was a lot of heat that had been produced in that room to melt those bags. This is a 3D depiction of the waste that is placed in room 7 of panel 7. The stacking started over here, and we went this way. We've got 24 rows of waste in before this incident occurred. And the one drum that you saw in the previous picture is located on the top of the stack under this magnesium oxide bag right there. The orange-colored magnesium oxide bags are bags that appear to have been exposed to the high heat. They have either bags that are gone or that are partially damaged due to heat. The other bags on tops of the stacks do not appear to be damaged at this time. The red containers that you can kind of see in the graphic are containers that contain either all or a portion of the same waste stream that the one container from Los Alamos that did show to be breached came from. You probably know it today or have heard several times over the last several months that we generically refer to that waste stream as the nitrate salts waste stream. And it is nitrate salt that was solidified and that has a high concentration of americium and plutonium in it. And those are particulate radionuclides. And so when the container heated up, the lid popped up, the contents came out. It appeared to have happened under a high heat environment. All of those airborne particulates got into the air, into that room, which is ventilated, and then was pushed through the exhaust portion of the mine into the HEPA filtration system. So one of the things that we want to know about that room, since we haven't been able to reach all the way back into the first row, is are there any other containers like that we would be able to see from a camera hanging or dangling from above? We've only able to reach back about 10 rows and want to be able to reach back all 24 rows. So we've been developing a boom system that is arrived and is ready to go underground. And this boom system is a engineered boom that deflects very little when a camera is placed on the end of it. And this trolley system will be able to place it in front of the waste stack and reach out over the waste with a camera on the end and be able to basically map the whole room with video and still shot objective evidence for the Accident Investigation Board. We'll also have the ability somewhat to drop the cameras down, but we're not going to have the ability to disturb any of the waste. And so we hope that this mapping will give us a good answer on were there any other concerns with the waste in that room.
JR?
Yes.
When are you supposed to have this system totally operational?
It's on site. It's been tested in a surface facility. The pieces of it are being transported underground, but that's a limited movement. And as soon as we can dedicate a forklift to this operation and we can get this trolley system built in the room, then we'll get going on it. Right now the projection is that we'll be able to take pictures from the end of that boom probably on January the 5th of the coming year. We've learned a lot of things since the two incidents. What we learned is we had weaknesses in some of our programs, and we are undergoing a cultural change with a lot of those systems, especially in the world of nuclear waste management and conduct of operations. And we're going to reemphasize safety in all areas, including nuclear safety along with it. The two accident investigation reports that have come out so far, one being from the fire, the other one being from the first phase of the radiological release, revealed several weaknesses, and we are working on the corrective actions for those right now, have been for several months, and we've incorporated some of them and have resumed going underground on a daily basis in the last month or so. It's a limited trip each time we go, though, because the underground facility is contaminated. At least parts of it are, and I'll have a map. I'll show you those parts in a minute. And it's being done under a what I would call an interim safety basis document that's been rewritten for this recovery operation. So the basic steps of recovery are radiological rollback, where we go into the repository and we define where the contamination is, and we define where the clean areas are and the not so clean areas are. Reestablishing of the safety systems and cleanup and making it a habitable environment again. Restoring our fire protection systems and performing maintenance on the geology down there. A salt repository is a living and active organism, and it moves and wants to seal itself up over time, and when we're in there operating it, keeping it open for waste emplacement, we have to do a lot of things to keep it open and keep it safe, including putting in rock bolts to keep any fractured rock from falling or coming in on any of our workers or any of our equipment. So expediting the mine stability and resuming bolting now that we're down in the repository again is our number one priority, and that's been occurring now for about a week. Also, a priority for us is the expediting of the closing of panels 6 and 7, or at least room 7 of panel 7. We had not closed panel 6 yet, even though it had been filled when these incidents occurred. And we have an order from the state of New Mexico that orders us to proceed with those closures. And we have a plan that's been approved to do that. And we have started working those plans. Probably the next big feature we're going to want to add to the underground system will be interim and a supplemental ventilation system. Right now, our two limitations in working in the underground environment are the number of people that we can have down there because of our egress system and because of the amount of fresh air that we can flow through the mine. All that air has to go through the HEPA filters on the surface. So HEPA filters are not designed for high air flows, and so we're limited in what we can do there. So we're going to put in an interim ventilation system and a supplemental ventilation system to produce more air in the areas of the mines so that we can do more rock bolting and we can do more reach projects. And hopefully by the first part of 2016, starting to get back into putting some waste down in the mine, but it'll be at a slow rate. So along with the restarting of the facility, we're also going to have to go through another operational readiness review. And in the meantime, that's limited a lot of the operations on site and with the generator sites. Although most generator sites are continuing to characterize and certify waste and store it, they have storage limitations and funding challenges while we're in a continuing resolution. And then I'm sure you'll hear more about Los Alamos's plans to recover their operation and get back into the certifying of true waste in their program a little bit later. So here's a plan view of the mine. I apologize for the quality of this, but in general, hopefully you can see the colors. The green areas are areas that have been determined to be clean and Workers can go in those areas without having any special protection, although all of our workers now underground are trained in radiological safety, and so they know what the requirements are for working in an environment like that. And so that'll be normal operation for us now. The red areas.
Excuse me, JR?
Yes.
So they will be suited up from now on?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
In the green areas, they don't have to be suited up.
Okay.
But if contamination is detected, they have methods for either getting out clean or suiting up and continuing with what they're doing.
So you have suit stations?
Yes. We have stations staged all along the way, especially between the transitions between the colors,
Okay.
for people to suit up if necessary, along with respirators.
Thank you.
So the red area is what we call the high contamination area. It was the area that the contamination spread to. Basically, all of panel 7 and most of the ancillary drifts around panel 7. The blue area is the prohibited areas. That's where most of the contamination is contained, and that happens to be the exhaust ventilation circuit. So the ventilation system worked the way it was designed. The fresh air gets sucked into the mine from the shafts, which are all in this area, gets directed down to the panels where the waste is placed, and then out of the mine. And when the radiation was detected, it switched over to the filtration system so that the airborne particulates were not released into the environment on the surface. Yes?
JR, you just answered my question. Okay, so in the red areas that are deemed a hot zone, now the drum was ruptured in the drift. I believe that's what they're called, correct? Or is it the panel?
The drift is one of the access ways to or from a panel.
Okay, so panel 7 then would have been the one closest to the main area? Okay, so it would be the furthest away then?
Right here is the spot in which the waste in room 7 of panel 7 is placed.
Okay.
And airflow basically was coming from this area, going that way. So the blue area downstream of the room is contaminated, and it's an area that's prohibited from people from going in. But because the airflow was so low, it also spread upstream into the rest of the panel.
So the blue areas then, those are the areas of contamination. Now the contamination, that's in a form of a particulate then?
Right, it's americium and plutonium particles that are either in the air or trapped on the salt walls or ceiling or floor.
Okay. Thank you, JR.
Yes.
JR, thank you. So again, I just want to go back a little bit. The interim ventilation will cover what area, if you can just point that out? No, go back to the map.
Okay.
And
Interim
then and the
Go ahead.
supplemental will just go ahead. Is it going to be a redundant system eventually? And then it'll be the backup or redundant?
We've used the two different terms because they are two different things.
Okay.
So I'll cover each one of them.
Thank you.
The interim ventilation system basically will be HEPA filtered skids with fans that'll be installed on the surface right next to the existing HEPA filter banks. They'll be tapped into the main duct, and so they will pull additional air that's also filtered through the mine, because the limitation we have right now in our current filtered system is the size of the fans and the size of the filter bank. And that's about 60,000 cubic feet per minute of air that it can pull. With the interim ventilation, we hope to get around 115,000, and that'll give us some extra air to work with in the mine.
And so you're limited though because of your hot spots and your contaminated areas.
We are limited. because of the hot spots, but I'll cover a little bit more on that too. Now, the supplemental ventilation system will be fans that'll be installed down in the mine that will bring in new sources of fresh air and provide fresh air to mainly the green areas, the areas that are not contaminated. And we can keep them under a positive pressure. That way, any contamination that's in the lower pressure won't want to travel to the higher pressure areas. It'll allow us to do more of a normal mine operation in those areas using diesel equipment where we have to have the airflow and not take away from the airflow that's required for working in the contaminated areas.
Okay, so that leads me to one more question. Thank you for bringing up the vehicle.
Okay.
A few of us were talking about that. Why is the vehicles, why are they preferred to be diesel? Are there not industrial strength electrical? I know there's some out of England, but I don't know if they would be available for this type of operation.
Some of our equipment is diesel, some is electric, and both types are available in this industry, and we've evaluated that on a case-by-case basis, and we still believe we have a need to operate diesel equipment because it provides greater power from a smaller source. The electrical feeds that we have going down into the mine just for the miner itself, which is electric, are tremendous power sources, and we'd have to drop additional new power sources down into the mine, which are all fed from the surface, in order to accommodate large new pieces of electric equipment. And our preference, we think the shorter path is to improve the ventilation system and stick with some diesel equipment. For example, the roof bolters.
Friendly pushback, though. The shorter path caused a major problem.
We understand that. We also don't think this is a shortcut. We just think that it was part of the evaluations that we're going to need to do from this point forward. In terms of worker safety and protection of the environment of the mine, all of that's considered when those decisions are made. And so electric, just because it's cleaner in its running operation does not necessarily mean that it's either safer or more efficient. And so those pieces of equipment are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Take, for example, the roof bolter. There are electric roof bolters available in industry, but they're not as effective as a diesel roof bolter. Bolts break a lot more often with an electric bolter, and the hazard of dealing with the trailing cable and maneuvering that through the mine also increases your risk to the workers. We have that with our continuous miner, and it's one of our greater hazard risks in operating down in the mine is having those 14,800 volt cables being dragged around in a dirty salt environment. So our contractor is evaluating those on a case-by-case basis. We're providing the oversight on those evaluations, and they've made those decisions, at least for the interim operation, and we're going to keep challenging them to keep making those evaluations, because if a better, safer method comes along, then we're going to try to find them the funding to put that into place. Part of our additional funding request also is to buy new equipment so that we can prevent what happened with the salt haul truck. You know, that thing was old. We had band-aided it a lot, and we saw what happened from doing that. So we're going to do our best to bring equipment back up to new standards, and if we can't, we're going to replace it.
Yeah, okay, and then you would also schedule that new equipment, probably schedule it out as well a little bit sooner than.
Would you repeat that, please?
I would hope that you would also, when you get new equipment, take a look at scheduling it out.
Scheduling it out?
Yeah, not keeping it out, but keeping it down there as long.
Right. Yeah, if a piece of equipment has surpassed its safe working life, then we are going to access it.
Thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to mention on the map here is that the red areas, although they're currently contaminated, are some of the areas that we're going to work on cleaning up so that we can better operate in the waste disposal circuits. And one of those methods that we're going to use is I'm going to skip this one, is a fixative. It may just be simply water, which crusts real well when you spray it on salt and let it dry, or it may be some adhesive type fix-it. And we're going to do that everywhere we can to just fix it in place because we've determined that that's overall probably the best way to manage it. Some of it will be removed, but most of it will be probably fixed in place.
So, JR?
Yes.
Is there still contamination emanating from that barrel right now?
From
the barrel that routes you?
We have to assume that there is. We don't know that for sure because we don't have a detector right there on it, but it's likely that it is.
When you close those panels, can you go back to that previous? Where would you close the panel? The one with highest contamination?
This is where the one drum is located. And so what we'll do is we'll put up metal bulkheads on each side of that area, and we'll shut off the ventilation to that area, and we'll put in what we call run-of-the-mine salt that's been mined out, that's clean in those areas to just fill in the void. And having it cut out of the ventilation circuit is going to be the primary protection method.
And the metal bulkhead is for explosions? Is that what?
Not necessarily. It's part of the sealing of the area off to keep the fresh air flow from going through. It's a metal bulkhead with rubber sealing panels around it, so it fits like a boot, and we can close those areas off completely and keep fresh air from flowing through.
Once the two panels are closed, do you think it'll be safe to go back in some of these?
Well, it's going to be a limited operation. So the downstream side, we're going to do our best to keep people out of it, but we'll have people ready to suit up if they have to get in it. The upstream side, that's the parts we're going to try to clean so that we can finish using the rest of that panel because we don't want to waste that real estate. Not only that, but it's going to take us a little while to finish mining panel 8 before or when we get back into at least a light operation. And so we need a place to be able to dispose of the waste. So we're going to probably use the first 4 or 5 rooms of panel 7 until panel 8 is mined and we can use that.
I just asked you about the red and the blue. Why a red area surrounded by blue? Wouldn't you assume that the highly contaminated area would spread throughout where we have that red area that's completely surrounded by a box of blue? Up above.
Right now, the best way to look at this map is just a snapshot in time where measurements have been made by RadCon techs that are fully suited up in respirators using instruments, and they've determined where contamination is and what the levels are. And so all that the red and the blue indicate are they're both contaminated areas, is that the red is an area that we're going to go target for cleanup, and the blue is an area where we're going to keep people out of, and we're not planning on cleaning it up. Okay?
JR,
Yes.
I understand that there's a possibility of getting another exhaust shaft built. If so, where would that be located?
Yes, there is a plan for the future to drill a whole new exhaust ventilation shaft. It is a capital line item project that's planned for a couple of years from now. And the general area for that will be over here somewhere. But that's all part of that design that hasn't been submitted for approval yet. And then the drifts will be tied into that system. And then when we do that, then we'll have a clean ventilation exhaust drift, and we'll be able to get back into complete full new operations. So we'll be working with this contaminated, partially ventilated environment probably for a couple of years.
JR, you have
If you were to, after you're all done,
Go ahead.
what would happen if another barrel ruptured like this one? Do you have a way in place to somehow prevent the problem from getting as out of hand as it seems to have done here, to require this, 2-year response? I mean, it's somewhat in the sense like a ship has bulkheads, and if it gets a hole in one place, it closes it off so it can't get, the ship can still stay afloat. And in this case, is there something that would keep the mine so it could be operated even if another incident occurred, or it could be brought back online in a matter of months rather than years?
We have talked about several supplemental features to our underground ventilation system for that very reason. We've talked about localized HEPA filter skids. We've talked about remote operating bulkheads, and I think the remote operating bulkheads is going to win, and so that'll probably go into the design. The challenge is flowing 400,000 cubic feet per minute of air through a salt environment and keeping people out of the ventilation airstream downstream from the rooms, and then being able to provide an engineered control in that environment when there aren't any people down there. We didn't ask for enough money to build an elaborate control system, but we did ask for enough money to build what I would call a supplemental control system. So I don't know that we can prevent the same thing from happening again in the future, but we can reduce its impact. So the downtime we think would be less if it were to occur again.
JR, you show a potential contamination area. Could you explain that to us a little bit?
Potential contamination area?
The turquoise.
This part right here?
Yeah.
It just hasn't been determined yet because of concerns about the roof bolt situation in that area of the mine.
Okay.
They got to take care of that first before we can complete those surveys. So the spot right before it has roof bolt issues. So they know what the contamination is, where the roof bolts need to be applied, but we're not going to let people in past that point until new roof bolts are installed.
Would part of it be because that was potentially the primary flow of the air that came out and then went out there?
Yeah, I really don't know what the geologists have determined about that portion of the mine. I haven't heard anything on that. I'm sure they're doing an analysis on it, though.
JR?
Yes.
On panel 6, were there any of those Los Alamos drums?
Yes.
Back end?
Yes.
Are you looking at those also, or are you just going to try to close that up?
We're just going to close it up. We know where they're at. We know how many there are, but we're not planning to go in with the reach system for that panel. We're just going to close it up and move on. So moving on with the recovery operation, we have, like I said, resumed roof bolting. We prioritize the areas that need to be bolted first, and we'll basically cover those in the order of importance. The waste hoist, which is our primary system for people and equipment, is back in operation. Although it's not in full operation, it is available for emergency egress, so we can put more people down in the mine, which has been one of our limitations. And that's just been in the last couple of days. Again, I talked about fixing the contamination in many portions of the mine that we want to reuse. And so some of those methods have been tested in a laboratory, and we're going to do some real testing in the repository when we can get back into getting more people down there. So here's a picture of one of those bulkheads. It's a big stainless steel wall with steel I-beams and a rubber seal that's all the way around it. And sometimes we install these with louvers so we can control the airflow if we want to control airflow. But this is an example of one that would be used for closure. So it wouldn't have any airflow louvers. It's just intended to seal off that portion of the mine. I talked a little bit already about the ventilation system. We are wanting, right now we're operating at 60,000 cubic feet per minute through a filter bank, and that's limiting our operation down in the mine. Normally we would have had 425,000 cubic feet per minute when we didn't have contamination and we were using the full fans. So the next thing we want to get to in the recovery plan is interim ventilation, where we can have about 114,000 cubic feet per minute of airflow. We can use more equipment, have more people, be able to do more things in the mine. And then we'll get to the supplemental ventilation system and get up to 180,000 cubic feet per minute of airflow, and also have it segregated so that we have fresh air staying in the clean portions of the mine, and good airflow in the contaminated portions. And then the long-term plan, as you heard, is to get back to a new ventilation system. It's a capital line item project to add a new ventilation system on the surface and bring that and connect that to a new exhaust ventilation shaft so that we can have a clean exhaust circuit in the mine for getting back into normal operations for the future.
At what point could you start accepting waste again? Phase 2 or Phase 3?
Phase 2 right now is our plan to start accepting waste on a limited basis in the first quarter of calendar year 2016. And then somewhere around the end of 2017, if the funding goes through and the design doesn't change, we hope to have Phase 3 in place so that we can get back into full operations.
So that's your best case scenario is 2016, Jared?
It is our best case scenario right now.
What's your worst case scenario?
It's going to slip in series with delays in funding, concerns about designs of the systems that have to be installed. Any number of factors could influence that. Could be a couple more years.
So the reason I'm asking this question is because we would like your advice too. One of our committees, we're looking at writing a recommendation to provide, to bring the storage operational program going back here at Lano, maybe other sites, but staging that waste to where once you're operational, then it's a quicker transfer, if you will. So we don't, I think some of us feel that we would be premature in bringing this back up because it came up in the summertime or a couple months ago and we were supposed to rewrite the recommendation. But we've got a little bit of cold feet because we want a better picture, better projection, you know, absolutely with your feedback as well, to see when might be a good time to possibly start initiating this process to see if we can get staging going and move forward.
Well, most TRU sites are continuing with their waste certification activities and are planning to store on site as much as possible. Idaho is an example. They're going to probably build a couple more buildings so that they can store their waste so that they can keep certifying, because if they just stop certifying and they completely shut down their operations, they won't meet their consent agreements that are coming up in 15 and 18.
And I appreciate that there's an economy. We already are facing some folks who've lost jobs, and that is unfortunate. I appreciate that, but we just want a better timeline, and then, because some of our concern is, if we start doing it anytime relatively soon, it's still above ground storage.
It is, and we only want that to be a temporary solution. The right solution for the long term is disposal in a deep geologic repository, and so we're going to get it back into the operation as soon as we can safely. And so our projections are what they are today, and they'll mature as time goes on. My recommendation would be to plan to certify and store waste as much as possible, because when we do get back into operation, hopefully there will be plenty of it in storage, and we can keep them trucks rolling, and we can get it down to WIP and get it out of the environment.
I think one of the questions related to that was whether it would be more efficient to at least increase the storage at WIP, because the transportation was presented as one of the limiting factors. That is, you could move waste from the surface at WIP underground faster than you could truck it in from off-site locations. And so that in terms of helping these sites deal with their state regulators primarily, but storing it at WIP, once WIP opened, you could get it down a lot faster than you could if you had to start bringing it in from around the country.
Adding additional surface storage at WIP is definitely something that we've evaluated. And at this point, because we're focused on recovering the repository, we don't want to let that get in the way or distract us, but it is something that we have evaluated, and we're going to continue to evaluate for what the timing of that should be if necessary.
With that in mind, what is your capacity right now? Are you near capacity, or is there room?
Our storage capacity on the surface at WIP is near capacity.
Okay.
It's very limited size. Its only intent was to take what was come through in a normal, weekly flow, about a week's worth of contact handle and remote handle waste. It wasn't intended to store for any extended period. So we would have to build separate facilities on the surface designed for containing anything in the event of an accident in order to accommodate any substantial receipt and storage on site. And those would be capital projects, and so they're just not currently in our plans. We are focused on recovering the repository and getting back into business.
So then my next question is for Mr. Bishop. Mr. Chair, Mr. Bishop, so we're sending drums now to Texas, or we were, where are we?
So as an interim measure, once the truck fire occurred and prior to understanding that it was a lannel drum that breached underground, we had continued to ship to Texas for interim storage.
So that's interim. Maybe that might be the resolve right now, because then we would then take what we have in interim and then take it to WIP once it's operational, correct?
Yeah, there is no intention, there's no permitting or licensing allowing for disposal at the Texas facility of the waste control specialist. It's only an interim storage under their Texas agreement state license.
Thank you. And you've explained that before, just for some of the new members and just for some of the public, just try to get them up to speed on that. Thank
Exactly, that's why I'm trying to give you a more complete answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, to refresh my memory, how many panels have been sealed already?
Let me answer that in two ways. There is waste in the first 6 panels, these dark colored ones.
Okay.
There is a small portion of waste here in panel 7. They've not all officially been closed. We were in the process of closing a couple of them, but they are sealed off from the ventilation circuit. So they have their short-term closure, but they don't have their long-term closures in some of the panels.
So then, what measure would need to be taken for the long-term closure then?
Take panel 6, for example. I talked about it. It needs the more extensive closure system installed. which is a combination of Bradis cloth, which is like a fiberglass cloth from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, metal bulkheads, and run-of-the-mill salt all the way to the top. And so that's something that's also a priority for us because the state has asked us to expedite that for panel 6 and for room 7 of panel 7. That's going to be high on our list. We've already actually started the prep work for that.
Okay, so then JR, regarding that, and forgive me for my ignorance, so I mean, who would give final blessing as to the actual, like, if you will, sealing of those additional panels?
Well, there's actually 2 approvals that we have to obtain. The New Mexico Environment Department has to certify the completeness of the hazardous waste management unit, which is a panel.
Okay.
And they do that as we fill them up and we ask them to come and certify that.
Okay.
The EPA, who's responsible for the long-term performance of the repository, has to approve the method and has to also agree to the final method that's used and agree that it was installed properly. That's the part that we had not completed on some of the panels, and so we were going through that process with the EPA when all this occurred also.
Okay.
Where we have a new panel closure design to meet their specifications that had been proposed and had not been promulgated yet.
Okay. JR, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. As of Friday of last week, it's been 9 months since that barrel ruptured, or that drum, I should say. It would seem that that panel would be closed off, sealed, and we would just move on.
So your concern is the amount of time that it's taken to get to this point?
Correct.
Well, we would like for you to understand that for the first couple of months after the incident, we didn't have anybody going into the mine. We didn't know what we had. And so a lot of that was very cautious, very limited mine entries to determine what went on. We sent our mine rescue teams underground with scientists to try to determine what went on. They would get suited up. They would wear respirators. They could only travel so far. They had to measure the contamination as they went. So the thing was full of unknowns, and there's still some unknowns. But we've mapped out the repository to the point now where we can go pretty regularly to and from, but it's still a limited operation. Because our safety basis was put into question, we've had to come up with an interim safety basis. And so everything that we do has to be pre-planned, has to be mocked up, has to be done by procedure, has to be done by approved work order, has to be as safe as possible, as clean as possible. And if there's anywhere along the way, any one person doesn't feel comfortable, we back out of it.
Sure.
So we've been doing that for 9 months. We've been trying to figure out how to do that the appropriate way, but in a more efficient way. And we're getting better at it, but that takes a lot of time.
Sure. No, yeah,
especially not knowing what you had.
Correct. I get that, Jared. Just, you know, and the board here, they know how I feel about this. I mean, to me, it's an anomaly. One single drum rupture, and it hasn't occurred. And it may never occur again, hopefully, you know. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. Thank you, JR.
All righty, thank you. Hopefully y'all also can appreciate that both for Los Alamos and for Carlsbad, that since these have occurred, a lot of people have paid a little bit closer attention to us that probably normally wouldn't have, and so we're being scrutinized heavily in everything that we do, and rightfully so. We're accountable to the public, and we don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, we can't just go back to business as usual. Things have to change in order for us to be able to do this right and provide that accountability to the public. So we want them to have confidence that when we do go back into operation, first, hopefully nothing like this will ever happen again. But if it does, then we're prepared to deal with it. And so that's where we're headed. And it's going to be slow. It's going to be tedious. We wish it had been moving trucks a couple of months ago, but we're just not there yet. So we've gone through a lot of training, a lot of culture changes, and before I wrap it up, I also want to mention a couple of things about the finalization of the action investigation report and what kind of actions that might come out of that might be. We've seen some preliminary language from the draft report, and it's given us an indication that we're going to need to have some corrective actions in the area of certifying waste for WIP disposal. We're going to have to, well, what I would say, dig a little deeper into the information that's provided especially in an area called acceptable knowledge for waste characterization. And so we're going to go ahead and start that process. We're going to go through some additional assessments at each one of the sites, and we're asking each of the sites to do their own assessments to increase the pedigree of the information that's obtained about not only how a waste stream was produced, but what's happened to that waste stream ever since it's been produced, especially if it had a characteristic that prohibited it from being certified for WIP disposal and it had to be reworked in any way. We're going to focus on those. We're going to increase the risk mitigation factors that go into that to reduce the risk in accepting a waste form that wouldn't be acceptable for disposal at WIP in the future. We're not going to be able to guarantee that it won't ever happen again, but we will guarantee that we're going to do everything we can to prevent it and to be prepared to deal with it if it does happen again. Any other questions?
Jared, a couple of questions. With all this moisture we've been having down in the southern part of the state, has that created any problems for WIP as far as, runoff or anything like that?
We have been blessed with a lot of extra rain this year, more than normal, and we're thankful for that. In terms of the surface facilities, it's not been a big deal. There is a sump at the bottom of our waste shaft that does collect water that drips down the shaft from one of the zones in the layers of geographic material in the shaft, and because we haven't been able to get down there to empty that sump, it got pretty full, so we're having to remove that water. But in terms of rainwater on the surface and any issues with that, it really wasn't a problem for us. Really just getting to and from the facility was the problem.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if this is the right forum to ask this question, but I'm going to go actually from just what's been on the news lately and what has been asked of me being on this board. So people's concerns are exactly what the drum that was sent from Los Alamos and the truth of when went into whatever the emails were and, this sort of thing. I don't know what's going on, but I think what I'd like to know is because of that question and the way it's arisen, will Lattin just be allowed to continue to fill those drums and then, or now because that is such a big topic and they want to know what's going in and they feel like they've been lied to, does that sort of stop us from now continuing to fill these drums and then sending them down there? I mean, are you kind of punished in a way, or, now are you on a shorter leash with them because of the way they feel about what went down there and what caused this problem?
Well, let me offer a partial answer, and then I'll give Lee or Pete an opportunity to follow on with the rest of the answer. We're still trying to figure out what happened. The Accident Investigation Board is still trying to figure out what happened. There's been a lot of investigation teams that have looked into what happened. There's been a lot of scientific experiments that have run to try to repeat what happened. We still are not at a point where we can say for sure we know what happened. But we have a pretty good idea of what could have happened. And so we know enough to proceed with some of the corrective actions, but until some of the Accident Investigation Board conclusions are wrapped up, we don't know enough to really move forward in a meaningful way. I won't really offer up anything on the articles that you're referring to, other than please recognize that for a couple of months, right after the incident, there were a lot of people that were wondering what happened, and there was a lot of information that was exchanged, and we all wanted to know what happened. We still want to know today for sure what happened. I think we have a pretty good idea of what happened. How we got there, the Accident Investigation Board, I'm sure, will reach some conclusion on that. What we need to do to prevent it, I'm sure they'll have recommendations on how to prevent it. In terms of our relationship with Los Alamos and where they fit in the priority of things, that hasn't changed. We're both in New Mexico. We have an obligation to the state of New Mexico. We're still wanting to meet that obligation. We're going to do it when the time is right and we can do it safely. Lee, do you have anything, or Pete, you want to add anything?
Sure. Yesterday, Allison had gotten a response from Director McMillan to the particular article that came out that appears to have been based on actual events. And I won't say any more about the article, and it appears to actually been based on actual events. But with all stories, everybody has their own perceptions. I noted when I asked Manice to send that response, Director McMillan's response to the CAB, I noted in my response to Manice, and you probably saw that, you as CAB members know far more than the general public, and I would offer any reporter in the state regarding this event. You've been following this, Manuel, for 9 months. You've got access to the accident investigation reports. You've had access to information directly from the department. I would ask you to draw your own conclusions on your experience and work with us as a board from there. But as JR and I work together, and Dave Nicholas in the back of the room, my supervisor on the True Waste program, we're meeting every month, replanning and restarting the operations. We are discussing the issues that you put into your recommendation regarding the rigor, the QA, the oversight, and we're talking about kind of a 360 oversight. We're going to be watching what they're doing. They're going to be watching what we're doing. We're going to add another level of rigor to this to try and ensure that this never happens again. So, any more?
Lee, just my personal opinion or point on what you just stated. This CAB is very open and forthright, and we have all the information that's shared with us. The media is entitled to that information also. They're more than welcome to come to these meetings or public meetings. So all that information has been put out there forthright by all parties involved, and they have that same opportunity to view that in real time as we do. That's just all I'd like to say.
Well, and
good point.
Great point, and we encourage the media. We let them know that these are happening. This is actually broadcast on the public access channel at a later date after just some limited editing to allow to fit it within that time slot. So we noticed this in the Federal Register, and we've always encouraged public participation. I'm actually encouraged as we've gone on today. The peanut gallery's kind of filled up and back there as well. In fact, I think I see one of my old managers back there. Don? Welcome, glad you could make it. It's good to see you.
I think Gerard has a question.
It's a comment. I want to thank JR for the presentation and where we're at. I appreciate your openness to the answers, but more importantly, I really appreciate your last few statements, taking ownership, responsibility. We know you and the operation have just been blasted quite a bit, and as you say, times maybe rightfully so. But your positive actions and systems that you're putting in place for a safer and better path forward, I think are commendable, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to tell you where we're at, and we hope to be able to provide you updates as we go on.
Alex, I think you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I had a question for Lee. Was the waste in that barrel ever physically characterized, or was that based on acceptable knowledge? Or, I mean, was there any chemical analysis of that waste?
So when we talk about nitrated salts, they were evaporator bottoms from the TA-55 operation. So they did have, when those evaporator bottoms were generated, there was analytical data associated with each batch of those evaporator bottoms as they were generated. And then there's some rudimentary characterization when it was being repackaged, pH and that type of thing.
So you've compared those with those daughter barrels that are out there?
So daughters and siblings. So we have a good profile, waste profile of what came out of that batch. And then we're hoping going to be taking physical samples here in the next couple of weeks to validate that information.
Of the barrels themselves?
So we have the empty barrel that the waste came out of, what we would call the parent drum. And then we also have a sibling drum, so a drum that was part of the split. So it started with the principal drum, the parent, and then we have daughters that have come out of those drums. So when we make a new drum or multiple drums, and we split that original drum into multiple drum, we call those daughters. And we do have, quote, a daughter or a sibling to the one drum that breached. And Randy, are you going to speak to that?
No, I can give you the background, and we can talk in considerable detail on that. That's correct. We have the original waste coming out of the processing line that's been in storage for 30 years. And they were brought in to do a number of things to make them WIP compliant. And this particular drum that breached at WIP was one of two drums that came from an original waste drum. We have complete characterization of the salt that was in that parent drum from a radiological perspective, but not necessarily from a chemical perspective. We have, since the incident, we've taken some samples of other drums that hadn't been processed yet, and we've done complete chemical characterization of those to get a better sense of the chemistry at play. But so the two drums that were generated from the same original waste, the one breached in WIP and the other one is still in storage at Los Alamos. We're monitoring that one with a particularly high frequency for temperature and any headspace gases that might be coming out of that container. And that there's a high priority to actually take that drum out of storage in Los Alamos and get it, pull a sample out of that and do a complete chemical analysis of how that waste is today. And that may give us more indications of the characteristics of the drum at WIP. However, I have to make it quite clear that even though they're siblings from the same parent, they're not identical twins. There are some very important differences between the drums that are, and quite important differences based on our scientific investigations of what might have happened at WIP. But we still have a lot of interest in getting a sample of the actual waste in that sibling and helping with the tail end of the investigations, as well as the important questions surrounding the processing in the future to turn these drums into something that is WIP compliant.
So in what you've seen in your sampling of the drum that you do have available, has that been actually, do you have the results yet?
No, we have not
Okay.
taken the sample yet. We're gearing up to take that sample. We're still at least a month away from getting that sample, partly because in order to safely handle that drum now, the science investigations have recommended that we take, immediately after the WIP accident, and we determined that it was a Los Alamos waste stream that was potentially involved, and we weren't able to confirm that until a couple weeks later.
we took the drums of the same waste stream and we put them into a robust container overpacking the 55-gallon drum. And those were put into controlled storage at Los Alamos. This overpack is the standard waste box. It's the same footprint in a TruPack container as a 7-drum cluster, but it's a single volume inside a bolted lid. So this sibling drum is inside this large overpacked steel container. That whole container will be pulled out of storage and put into a freezer to reduce the temperature. Based on all of our investigations, we can render the drums safe to handle by lowering their temperature substantially. So we'll put the whole assembly into a freezer, and then while it's cold, we will take that bolted lid off, pull that drum off, take the lid off, and grab a sample, and then button it back up and put it back into the controlled storage environment. So the sequence of events and making sure we do that safely is part, and the time it's taking to procure and install the freezers. We have the freezers on site now that were just recently delivered. We have to make some electrical modifications to install the freezers, do some final testing with some surrogate drums to make sure we know how long they have to stay in the freezer to reduce the temperature in the center of the drum. And then we can start to execute that plan for the actual waste. So it's quite involved even for the simple process of pulling a sample from those drums.
Yeah, it sounds pretty involved. The biggest question I hear out there, even from city officials, is why this drum and not the other drums? And
to be honest, there's probably 100 scientists that have been asking that same question over the last 5 months to try to understand what characteristics of this one drum that breached. You know, when we first, when JR was sending people into the underground, there was a very understandable concern. Are there other drums that might be ready to breach? And in our investigations, we have found that there were some relatively unique characteristics of this drum that could explain why only one drum has exhibited this behavior. And you'll be seeing a lot more in reports. A very important report has been completed and is in peer review right now, just to make sure all the scientific questions are addressed, and that will start. That will give everybody a good reference for the investigations that have been done scientifically and what makes this drum relatively unique.
So Alex, just as a point of clarification for everybody else, the set of analysis or what we'll be looking at is not EPA waste characterizations. These samples are going to be forensic samples. We're looking at a causal, trying to figure out what the reaction was, not necessarily recharacterize the drum or put additional codes on it. This is more of the CSI Los Alamos type approach to things. You know, we have an event now, what caused the event?
That's an important point, because I think a lot of people are expecting to see the drum analyzed for the various constituents, and you're saying you're really looking for a causal effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions at this time for JR? Okay, I guess we can proceed on with
we can,
agenda.
with the agenda as we get settled back in. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, about half an hour. We're still expecting the secretary to attend. Give him a couple minutes to catch up if he's going to make his heroic appearance. With that, we're going to embarrass Chris and have Chris come up, and we have a plaque for her in appreciation of her service to the cab. So again, Chris started when she was 8 years old with federal government. Her service in the Girl Scouts actually counted towards her federal service. So 37 years later, Ms. Houston will be moving on to a life of retirement and ease, and I'm very envious. We thank you for your service, and the CAB thanks you. You've been a great asset. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
I just want to say a couple of words about Chris also. I've only gotten the chance to work with Chris for about 3 years, but she does really have a very long, dedicated, and various federal service. This is actually her second tour of duty, I believe, working with the CAB. And when I got to know Chris, I was asking her what her professional interests were. She said if there's any way I can get back and work with the CAB, she found that to be a really a valuable part of her career. Delighted to have her at the CAB. I have benefited greatly. She's also done a lot of work. She's upgraded our entire internal assessment program. Can't say good things enough about Chris. We're really going to miss you. A little bit of a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much, Chris.
Pictures? No speech. It's been a delight to work with this CAB over the years, and you are such a wonderful group of people. I've had a lot of fun over the last few years. So I wish you luck. Don't be surprised if you see me. I guess I have to stay out a year before I can come back and harass you. But as long as you have free meals, I might be back.
Alumni status.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what we discussed. Okay. At this time, I think we'll proceed with the agenda and the update. Excuse me, it's close enough. And we'll go on to update from liaisons. We thought we might reverse order this, if it's all right, since they sort of arrived in certain order. We thought they'd prepare maybe a little better that way. So we thought we might start with Randy Erickson and an update. Is that agreeable?
That's okay with me. Pete looks like he's not going to.
And then go to Pete, and then hopefully somebody from NMED will be here.
And I do have a couple of slides that I don't know, and if they aren't ready to project, it's not a disaster. Okay. But let me start with an introduction. I apologize I wasn't here early enough to participate in the introductions. My name is Randy Erickson, and I've been at Los Alamos National Laboratory for about 32 years, so I'm not a new kid on the block. Came here originally as a student from Illinois. My mental image of New Mexico was it was the place where Bugs Bunny made a wrong turn, and it was mostly desert tundra. And when I got here as a student for the summer, I fell in love with the place and had to finish up some schooling, but came back here as a priority. So I've been in many different organizations at the laboratory, but was recently, October 1st, asked to step in with some of the management changes that were happening in our environmental programs, primarily as a result of the whip accident. And Jeff Mousseau was, as I understand it, a fairly routine person to come here. So I'm now the acting associate director in Jeff's place. The roles and responsibilities of our organizations at the laboratory have shifted somewhat in response to the WIP event, and so there's actually two of us here today. Michael Brandt is over in the other side of the room. He's the associate director for environment, safety, and health. And one of the things that emerged in the context of the WIP investigation is that we actually had two organizations at the laboratory, Michael's organization and the environmental programs organization, that were independently interacting with the state of New Mexico on regulatory concerns. Michael's organization for the laboratory as a whole, and Jeff Mousseau from the perspective of the environmental programs. And the laboratory director, Charlie McMillan, thought it was very important to have a single point of contact with the state as it related to commitments that we've made to the state, and not have independent offices making individual commitments to the state that might not be coordinated. Now, the state of New Mexico has some really good staff people, and they could probably help us integrate the messages if we didn't do a very good job of integrating ourselves. But Charlie wanted to have one single person that he could turn to make sure that we were managing all of our commitments as they relate to environmental compliance. And so that is Michael Brandt's role, and so you may be seeing him from time to time, depending on the subject matter of interest or the presentations that you've requested from Los Alamos. We will, in general, both try to make these meetings, but we will make it a very high priority for one of us to be at these meetings. And Michael and I have been spending a lot of time together making sure that we understand how all the pieces fit together and what the path forward is for some of the challenges that have emerged as a result of the accident at WIP. So the next slide, if I could have that. Oh, I guess I have the tool. So my apologies. But I may have to get closer. Can you drive from there? Oh, thank you so much. So I've already covered item number 1, and so if you can flip the chart again. I've basically related everything that's on this chart. So the nitrate salt waste. JR gave a really good overview of the perspectives from WIP. We are now turning a corner from a concerted effort in the investigation phase to try to understand what likely happened to cause that drum to breach, to looking at what scientific studies we need to do to establish the technical basis for the path forward. And so in the investigation, we had 2 teams of scientists focused, and they were working independently initially just to make sure that there was a breadth of thought going into the process. Partway through the investigation, the teams merged. And we have a couple of external review teams that have come in to help us understand internally what caused the problems at WIP and their recommendations. And we, in the context of our internal investigations, did discover that we had some RCRA non-compliances in the way we had handled these materials, and we can get into much more detail at a later date in this brief update. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we reported those issues to the state of New Mexico, and we are, as JR noted, we're waiting for the Accident Investigation Board report to give us the full picture of the issues that have been discovered, both from our internal investigation and from the external Accident Investigation Board, so we can develop a integrated corrective action plan and put all of our efforts behind initiating the actions to prevent this type of issue to happen again. So there will be a lot more to see once we have that corrective action plan established, and we can talk in much more detail about the investigations once the Accident Investigation Board is published. We've been a little bit reluctant to say a lot about our internal investigations out in the public because we don't want to preempt the Accident Investigation Board as they release their report, and we want to give them the opportunity to articulate the results of their investigation without having them have to explain differences between what we might have said about things. And my personal view is that there's very good agreement between the issues that the Accident Investigation Board has uncovered and what we uncovered in our internal investigations, but we believe it's appropriate for them to have the opportunity to present those in a way that isn't confused by things that we have stated a little bit differently perhaps. But, so you'll see a lot more about the accident investigation once the AIB is ready to release that report, and we'll be happy to come and talk in more detail at that point in time. I have a few other charts that do illustrate that there are a lot of other things going on at Los Alamos while we're responding to the whip accident, and we're making progress on a number of our programs to deal with groundwater, surface water, and soil contamination, and making sure that we're monitoring those and taking the appropriate actions. So the next slide goes to one of the key focus areas. Some of these groundwater and surface water projects took a little bit of a backseat to the focus on getting the true waste out of Los Alamos over the last couple of years. But very important activities surrounding chromium that was detected at the laboratory. We've characterized the extent of the contamination. We have proposals for how to do some corrective measures to try to prevent the contamination from spreading and to try to remove the contamination from the groundwater. That's something you'll also be hearing much more about. There's a lot of good work going on to try to address that legacy contamination from historic operations at the laboratory. The next slide. No, yes, sir.
Excuse me, Randy. Just go back. The pumped water is treated with ion exchange, and then that's the chromium is converted. Is that what basically goes
Well,
on?
there's two paths for addressing the chromium, depending on the oxidation state of the chromium. It is either toxic or it is not, and so there are ways of addressing that path forward, of leaving the chromium in place but converting it to a non-toxic form. Also, we can pull groundwater up to the surface, do some purification, and then re-inject that water in a way that actually helps the containment of that plume from spreading. And so I think both ideas are on the table, but
and where is the water then land applied?
Right now it's been land applied in the vicinity of the wells.
Okay, but in one of the canyons?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And this is, we realize that the treatment protocols that we could do for this also intersect with water resource issues, and land applying water that we've pulled out of the groundwater and cleaned it up is taking it out of the water resource for the future, because land application then removes that from possible longer-term use. So the possibility of treating the water, purifying it, and then re-injecting it into the groundwater is preferred from an overall water resource perspective. But at this point, in the preliminary testing that we've been doing, we have only been land applying the water. There are permits required for re-injecting the water. As you might guess, that's an important thing to make sure we're doing correctly. And so that will involve a considerable evaluation and a permit from the state of New Mexico in order for that to be allowed.
You plan on giving us a report maybe in March or April about this, just to give us an idea of
Sure, we
how
can
much water you
we can
worked with
be happy to come
and
and give you an update at that point in time. Yes.
And Mr. Chair, reminding us on the tour with Danny Castman, the land application makes this a seasonal activity. Because of the winter, we would have 5 or 6 feet of ice in the bottom of that canyon if we continued through the winter. So the re-injection offers a year-round solution to a larger scale production.
Yep.
Good point. Thank you.
So the next slide talks about RDX, which is an explosive compound which is being addressed from the historic high explosives machining operations, some of the water coming out of that facility was deposited in the soil in the vicinity of the building. There's been already progress on cleaning up the soil, but then some of the RDX has percolated into lower depths, and so we've got a number of activities trying to look at different techniques for removing the less accessible contamination through in the process of monitoring wells to understand that, and a pump and treat approach to clean up that contamination. So that's another key focus for this next year. There's been substantial progress, and we'll be happy to talk more fully about that category of effort in the future as well. Thank you. The next slide talks about another area at the laboratory where, and this is in the vicinity of Area G, this is Area L up on the mesa, where we have a historic site that was used for disposal of liquids from some of the operations, and so there's a vapor plume that we have put in some monitoring wells that we are also going to be converting into extraction wells, and that's something that is looks like a fairly straightforward opportunity in a fairly short period of time to remediate this particular problem. But this is another area that doesn't threaten the groundwater at this point in time, but by taking action now, we can preclude that from happening sometime in the future. So that's another topical area that we can discuss in much more detail. And there may be one more slide on stormwater. We have a very comprehensive program to monitor stormwater runoff from the laboratory and make sure we're not migrating any contamination from where we know it to exist. And we have an EPA permit that we're working under at this point in time. There was an application for a renewal of that permit submitted last spring, and you may hear more about that early in 2015 in terms of response back from EPA on the update to that permit. But that's a program that is very important and mature in terms of the monitoring and making sure that we understand exactly what's happening. We respond if there's a unusually large storm that creates more flow than we typically have, because that can cause transport of contaminants more quickly, and we have triggers for modifying our sampling protocols in response to those weather events, and that is all established through the current permit. And that's another topic that may have a lot of interest on the part of the CAB, and so this is kind of a quick snapshot, but an offer to talk in more detail at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any questions? Emmanuel has a question.
Mr. Chair, Randy, the Surface Water Quality Bureau and the Communities for Clean Water through EPA, is that part of the MS4 permit?
I'm not. Now you're calling me for only having been in my job for 6 weeks, so you're asking a level of detail. Michael, do you know?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. The review of the NMED Surface Water Quality Bureau and Communities for Clean Water, the submittal to EPA, is that part of the MS4 permit?
I don't believe it is, but what I can do is we can take that as a question and we can follow up.
Okay.
David Rhodes, could you approach the mic if you have an answer? If not, you could get me a cup of coffee.
One request at a time.
Just saying, yeah.
David Rhodes, Los Alamos Field Office. The CCW petition that was filed with the EPA was in regards to what is considered a gap between the individual permit for stormwater, which is one NPDS permit, and the site MSGP, which would cover the operating facilities. And it was perceived that there was a gap. And they've used some of our own information in writing their petition. But in brief, that petition they filed was to request the EPA issue an MS4. Does that kind of get the question?
Perfect. Thank you.
Lee, Black?
Yeah, and that Black's contacts.
I believe, Daniel, you have a question?
Chairman, thank you. Randy, on your presentation, page 6, the RDX groundwater remediation, what TA is that? Technical area is that coming from?
Technically Area 16. It's up by the back gate, West Hamas Road, east of the back corner of the laboratory. So it's from a hydrologic perspective, it's at an uphill point, and it has to go a long way before it gets off laboratory property.
Sir, do you all, because we know we've looked at the chromium plume, this plume, do you guys have like a list of potential groundwater and or surface water areas that you need to address that you're prioritizing? Maybe that's been provided to this board before, but if not, could we have something like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a presentation in a concise format that goes to that, but I do know that in some of our meetings with the NMED that talk about the full scope of activities and the priorities, that might be a framework that would allow us to give you that information more completely.
Mr. Chairman, Randy, I had a generic question. What is the RDX? What is that material?
RDX is previously used high explosive compound that was used in a variety of programs, but predominantly the weapons program. It's high explosives that were machined. It's kind of like a plastic material, and when you machine it, it imposes understandable safety concerns. Using water in the machining operations was part of how they could do that machining safely, and the effluent from that machining operation contained entrained particles of this high explosive material. So in the soil that was the main deposit of this contamination, there was actually some fairly significant percentages of the soil that had this explosive compound, which made it very interesting to clean up from a safety perspective. But that's been completed. But that's at least a brief description of what that material is and how it came to be where it is today.
So the water that was used during the machining was kind of like a lubricant on a lathe?
Or a quenching, actually, for the energetic material, yes.
So it was a washing off of the lubricant or...
Yeah, the turnings,
the turnings
from a machining operation would be very hazardous, and they used water to remove that hazard during the machining operations. And in the era that they were doing that machining, there was a different set of standards for discharge, and so that was allowed or not reviewed at the time, perhaps. But that represents a contamination now in the soil that is being addressed.
Okay, thank you. A thought I had after your earlier presentation regarding the freezers that are being presently wired and plumbed for the chilling of these drums to gain access. What temperatures are expected to be reached that might be necessary to gain access to the core of the drums?
The technical basis for this is looking at all of the testing we've done. How high a temperature do you see some thermal instability or thermal decomposition or energetic reactions? And by industry standards, you lower that 50 degrees centigrade, and that number turns into 10 degrees centigrade. So we can safely handle these materials by industrial protocols for safety margin at 10 degrees centigrade. The freezers are intended to bring the material down to minus 10 degrees centigrade, because achieving that even colder temperature can shut off some of the biological activity that might be happening inside these drums. We didn't get into the full discussion of the nitrate salts. JR talked a little bit about it, but one of the errors that was made in our treatment of these drums was the introduction of an organic absorbent, a wheat-based product, and that was not what the intent was. And I can get into a lot more detail of how that was allowed to happen. But because of that, a wheat-based product, it can undergo biological activity. Now, the most well-known biological activity with grain is fermentation, and so the freezing the drums to minus 10 degrees actually, for a large part of the biological activity potential, it destroys the organisms from continuing to consume the wheat. And so by freezing it to minus 10 degrees and then allowing it to warm up to 10 degrees, we believe we've taken away some of the possible instability of this material. Plus, we're at a temperature that has this 50-degree margin of safety from the testing that we've done. So we'll have it frozen to minus 10, then it'll be pulled out of the freezer and allowed to warm up to the point where it gets to 10 degrees before we would have to put it back into the freezer if there was a delay in its processing.
So it's taken in and pulled out like a big lamb shank out of a walk-in cooler?
Yes, sir. Yeah, very
and
much
then
like
worked
that.
on by technicians and scientists?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
But anyway, this is something we can talk a lot more about fully once the accident investigation report is out there, and we can have a very in-depth discussion of that full story. But that's based on the scientific investigations. And we will modify things as necessary if the accident investigation board has additional perspectives that we may not have captured in our internal investigation. So we will be. We're waiting with interest to get that report, as everybody is.
Very good. Thank you, Andy, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions for Randy? Oh, Steve?
I have two. One is, one of the things that ended up in our work plans was technical area 49, and that's something we know almost nothing about. I wonder if you could enlighten us just a little bit as to what's going on there.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in a position to enlighten you much more than you already are, but that's something that I can certainly get back to the board to
Thank you.
Give a more comprehensive overview. But that's a topic that hasn't come up yet in my 6 weeks on the job. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
David, do we have any remedial activities planned in the next couple of years in TA 49? Just so we can get close the loop today, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One thing we try to do is if we can close it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We actually have a couple of investigation reports that have been prepared. There's a little bit of work left to go in order to fully characterize the area before we can proceed to what we would call a corrective measures evaluation, which is a recommendation on a remedy to the state. Right now, that area is a very stable area without needing a lot of attention to it in regards to some of the other higher priority activities. So we don't expect to actively pick back up on that little remaining work that's there until probably 2018, maybe 3 years down the road at the earliest. Groundwater's got to come first. This is, like I say, you can set it aside and come back later. It's totally surface covered. There is no surface risk to anyone.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
My other question was, partly the problem with that drum seems to be technical, but a lot of it also seems to be kind of management and communication issues that broke down along the way that led to the technical problems. And I'm assuming you're addressing those, and maybe your being here is part of addressing those. I don't know.
Yeah, clearly, many times at the laboratory we find that we have problems that emerge, and it relates to what we call conduct of operations, where people doing the work didn't necessarily follow the procedures as written. This is a case where, unfortunately, the workers followed the procedures as written, and the procedures were incorrect. And it was in an area where the average worker wouldn't really understand the importance of that incorrect recipe. So most of the efforts we're focusing in on, in a preliminary sense, is to look very critically at making sure we have all of the right technical experts looking at these procedures and validating that the recipe is correct. If we had invested 1% of the scientific talent early on in this program of what we've done investigating the WIP event, that could have been prevented. There were some issues in how we treated the materials from a RECRA perspective that I alluded to. There were fairly fundamental RECRA requirements that were missed. And you'll see more about that as that plays through the process with NMED. And we had the use of an organic absorbent. Most people with a chemistry class would have said that that's not a really good idea. But with the way this procedure was modified and the way the instruction to use the organic material was inserted at the tail end of a review process, being thought that it was a minor edit, is essentially what happened. So we're looking at a significant failure in providing appropriate technical review for operating procedures, and that is the main focus of our initial activities in anticipation of the Accident Investigation Board.
Any other questions for Randy at this point?
NPDES permit for sediment discharges from the Buckman Direct Diversion Facility. We were actually finding that the sediment return facility was actually removing some of the PCBs, in that some of the fines that were being removed actually had PCBs adhered to them, and so we were actually reducing the level of the intake water that we were processing at the BDD. And so it was actually, some of it went up for further removal at the treatment plant itself. There's a sediment return facility down at the river to take out some of the coarser sediment. And some of the fines that went up to the treatment plant did have PCBs, but they're removed at the treatment plant. Through additional sampling, we convinced NMED and EPA that we were not discharging PCBs above the stream water standard for that, but it's a situation we're going to have to face again during our next permit renewal. So in addition to some of these stormwater reports, is there a way to get reports on what, if anything, from the laboratory has made it down to the Rio Grande and how it's affected the surface water quality at the Rio Grande and the surface water standards? Because the state did submit a 305B report to EPA and Congress saying that that segment is impaired for PCBs. And it is above standard, and they're pointing back to the laboratory as the source of that contamination.
Yes, we do have monitoring of the surface water that goes into the Rio Grande, and there is analysis reports that we can look at. We can review the spatial orientation of the monitoring and the data that we're getting from that, and try to help unravel that question. It's not an unusual challenge to make sure you're understanding the upstream and the downstream characteristics and how that relates to what's happening in between. And so we're very familiar with that kind of situation in other contexts, and we'll be happy to try to help sort that out. And if there are weaknesses in where the monitoring is done or how it's done that doesn't allow us to fully address that situation, then we'll look at what it takes to increase the monitoring so we can try to answer those technical questions.
Great. I would appreciate if we could actually get some kind of report out here to the board, because some of those are definitely related to EM sites, some of the PCBs that are leaving the laboratory.
Yeah. So any reports we have on the PCBs that would help this, we'll try to provide. They're already owed to the state. There's no reason why we can't share them with the CAB so we can try to unfold the challenge.
Excuse me. Thank you, Alex. Randy, isn't there an annual report that Lanel does also about some of the constituents coming into the Rio Grande? I've seen that before.
Yeah, I believe
I don't know
is.
when that's due out.
I don't know, but I can find that out.
But it has to do with a lot of the contaminants
Yep.
that possibly could come down, and they've actually
Right.
gotten a record of. Okay, so we do look forward to another report from you when you get
Very
more
good.
stable
Yep.
in the job and got more technical knowledge, as you say, concerning what we're asking about. But hopefully, like, I guess March meeting, we won't get you for January.
Yeah, and actually there are people I could have brought with me that could have addressed some of these questions much more satisfactorily, so I apologize that I didn't anticipate.
But thank you so much for giving us up. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, Irene.
Hello, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the vapor plume and what are any possible risks or hazards associated with that?
Yeah, the vapor plume at this point is fairly restricted in extent in the Area L location that I described. And so we are monitoring that very carefully, and we're looking at the extraction process to mitigate that. But at this point, we believe that there is no risk off of laboratory property or no conceivable way that could become that kind of circumstance in the context of what we're trying to do to take care of that problem.
Thank you. David, did you want to comment about something related to this?
Actually, just a clarification question. Would you be interested in last year's annual update on the sediment transport, which is already available on the public website, but we are scheduled to submit to the state the next annual update for the sediment transport in the March of 15 timeframe? So there will be an update in probably about 4 months.
Well, probably the sediment transport for this year that you're going to, I guess, is due in March of 15.
Correct.
That's the one we'd probably be interested. I don't know if Alex wants to see something about this last year's.
Is that inclusive of your site-wide monitoring report, your annual site-wide monitoring report?
This would be some of the information that was contained in the annual surveillance report that we did issue for the site, but it is a bit more broad in terms of the analysis of the entire system, whereas what was in the surveillance report was a very snapshot summary of preliminary data. It was not a complete analysis.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Dave. If there's any other further questions, I think we'll move on with the next liaison. And at this time, since Ryan has been able to make it here for the meeting and actually on time for when we figured, we'd appreciate if you would go ahead and present your report. Thank you.
All right. Does that work? There we go. Well, thanks for having me. I thought I was running on time, but you all are running early, so I thought I was going to have some time to hit the tables before and see how lucky I was feeling. No, I'm just joking. I don't make enough money to gamble. So thanks for having me. These are obviously very difficult times for everybody that is involved with the laboratory, but I think it's really important to look at how we can move forward from the issues that have occurred at WIP that are related to Lannel. So I thought I would talk to you about some of the key issues I've identified that need to be addressed as we begin this process of moving forward. I had the pleasure of traveling last week to an intergovernmental conference where there's a lot of state representatives there, from local government officials, state legislators, as well as members of my agency, with other site representatives as well as DOE officials. And I gave a speech at that conference where I talked a lot about these same concepts. So I thought it would be good to kind of update you on some of the things we're thinking about from the state's perspective that are necessary to really moving us forward. I think most importantly, though, just like I said in the beginning, these are difficult times, but from the state's perspective, we stand strongly behind Los Alamos National Laboratory. We believe in the mission of this facility and all of the great things that this facility has done in the past, and really want this facility to thrive moving forward. That being said, obviously, my role is to regulate this facility and ensure that it's following all of our laws and rules that I'm charged with implementing, and making sure that we don't have any future situations like we just experienced at WIP occur again. Now, the situation at WIP, which you all, I think, have already heard from JR about, we've talked a lot about what actually occurred at WIP, but I think it's really important not to lose sight of what could have occurred at WIP. We were extremely fortunate in that this release occurred at 11:15 on a Friday night when the mine had already been closed down due to the fire that occurred on February 5th. So the release occurred on February 14th. About 9 days before that, there was a vehicle, salt hauler truck, caught on fire, and that actually closed down the mine. And I mention that not to minimize what occurred, because we were certainly taking very seriously what did occur, but just to remind ourselves about how important it is to get this right. Because during a normal shift in the underground at the WIP, there's about 80 workers would be in the underground working at the WIP. And if this were to have occurred at 11:14 in the morning on February 4th, as opposed to 11:15 at night on February 14th, we'd be having a much, much different conversation today. And we probably would be in a much more precarious situation. So I think we, in some sense, were fortunate in the timing of this event, and also fortunate in where it occurred. The WIP facility, the structural integrity of the facility was not compromised during this incident. It got very, very hot, as the pictures that I think you've seen demonstrated, for a very brief period of time in the underground. But the actual structural integrity of the salt remained intact. And but for some dampers that did not close properly, really would have had no release into the environment. Now, I think, again, hindsight's 20/20. There's a lot of things that we're going to fix moving forward, and there's a lot of issues that this has brought to the forefront, and there's going to be additional issues that we're going to uncover as we move forward in the next couple weeks and months ahead. But I do think it's important to just think about what did not occur here, because this is a very important facility. This is a very risky enterprise, and if mistakes are made, corners are cut, things aren't done properly, then people, their health and safety are at risk. And I keep sight of that as in everything I do, but this, I think, has really brought that to the forefront, that we must make sure we get this right as we move forward. And that's really the key. I think the key for me moving forward, I've got my first kind of bullet is restoring public confidence. And how do you restore public confidence? I think first and foremost by implementing meaningful corrective actions. And so that involves, analyzing the results of the various investigations that are occurring, and then implementing, not plans. I mean, you need a plan in order to implement a correction, but really, I'm not going to rest until we've actually done the work, the corrective actions that need to be implemented, and have completed those. And I think that's where we need to start. And in doing that, I think the first thing that we really need to do is understand exactly what caused the release. And unless there's been new information presented to you all, I know we've got a lot of different information, and we're getting closer to concluding what the exact cause of, what the root cause of this release was, but we still have not arrived at that point where I think the Department of Energy has been able to conclusively identify the root cause of the release. We know that, we believe that it came from a container from Los Alamos, that we have visual evidence of a breached container that originated up at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And the Department of Energy, as well as Los Alamos National Laboratory, have assembled various teams to identify exactly what the root cause of this release was. But that's critical in terms of fashioning corrective actions, because until we know exactly what occurred, we really can't begin to move forward with reopening WIP and having some type of assurance that we're going to protect the public and really fix problems at generator sites like Los Alamos. And I wouldn't limit the corrective actions to Los Alamos. We need to understand exactly what occurred up at Los Alamos. But once we identify what occurred up at Los Alamos, and we've identified all of the corrective actions that need to be taken up at Los Alamos, we really need to also look at the rest of the site. Los Alamos is one of a number of generator sites, and I think we need to look complex-wide to make sure that the same problems that we've uncovered up at Los Alamos are not also occurring at other sites like Oak Ridge or Savannah River. And so I think that first and foremost, implementing meaningful corrective actions will require identifying the root cause of the release, and then identifying how we're going to fix the processes at the generator sites to ensure that something like this does not occur again. As we look forward, I think the state, certainly we want to also understand how some of the communication breakdowns occurred and were allowed to occur, and develop strategies to ensure that we don't have additional communication breakdowns again going forward. One of the things that's been troubling, I'm struggling whether troubling is the right word, but I think it is, certainly, it's not too strong, is to understand why advice from the difficult waste team down in Carlsbad regarding the proper remediation of these nitrate salt bearing containers was not followed up on the hill. Lanol has a team, a difficult waste team in Carlsbad that I believe works for Los Alamos National Laboratory or LANS. I'm not sure who the difficult waste team works for, but it's Lanol in Carlsbad on the difficult waste team. Had provided some direction as to how to handle this particular stream of waste that proved to be very difficult, and that communication obviously was not followed, or that advice was not followed. And we need to understand exactly why that advice was not followed. I mean, that's the reason why we have those subject matter experts, is to provide advice on difficult waste streams. And I think that's a key. There's been a lot of documented communication issues that have occurred, but that in particular is one that I'm extremely interested in having answered, and to figure out exactly how we can ensure that these communication lapses don't occur again moving forward. When you look at the disposal of waste at the WIP facility, we've been able to dispose of a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And so the waste streams that we're now starting to move into for disposal at the WIP facility are increasingly difficult. So this nitrate salt-bearing waste stream was a difficult waste stream to deal with, certainly. But there are other waste streams that are going to be challenging. And as we move forward, we need to make sure that there's proper analyses from a scientific standpoint that are occurring, and that once those analyses occur, that the directions that are provided by those technical teams are implemented, and that there's clear accountability to ensure that that direction has in fact been implemented. So I think that's going to be another key issue, is really understanding why specific advice was not followed and how we can ensure that that won't occur again moving forward. I think we need to understand more about why the CCP, the Central Characterization Process, also failed to identify the problem and identify how we can fix some of the deficiencies in the CCP process. Finally, not from a Los Alamos perspective, but from a WIP perspective, we really have to ensure that the mine safety culture at the WIP is improved. One of the things that the Accident Investigation Board really talked about at the WIP site was the difference between the kind of the RAD culture, the waste handling, the hazardous waste and radiological waste handling culture, and the mine safety culture. And the WIP facility seemed to be doing a very good job when it comes to the RAD side, and they seem to be doing a very poor job when it comes to the promoting a really strong culture of safety from a mine, from operating standpoint. So those are some really key corrective actions, very broadly speaking, that I think we need to be focused on and ensure are addressed before we're going to put men and women back down into the WIP facility and potentially put them in a situation where they're now underground. And certainly we're very focused on moving as efficiently as possible, but at the same time we need to make sure that, like I said in the beginning, this is too important to people and to the public, to the men and women who have to work in the mine, to the people who live in the communities that both generate waste as well as store waste or dispose of waste, to rush. We need to get it right. So it's more important to make sure that as we move forward that we get this done correctly than it is to kind of rush to get something done in a couple months. So that's kind of the mindset I'm approaching this with. I want to be efficient, but I want to make sure we're giving this the appropriate attention that it deserves. Another major issue to moving forward is going to involve improving communications across, complex-wide between the Department of Energy and different states, as well as the state of New Mexico. We need to improve our communication. I think that the Department of Energy is improving its communication with the state, but things aren't perfect, and there's obviously room for improvement. I think states across the complex need to improve communication with each other. This is not something that's really a big issue for you all, but it's something that's big for me in my position, in that WIP is approved to take waste from a variety of different sites around the complex, and there's a lot of jockeying for position to get waste to the WIP. There's also a lot of fighting for funding that occurs among and between states, and that when states fight against each other and work against each other on funding, a lot of times it's to the detriment of either states and their needs or of the WIP facility. And so I think there needs to be a better job for states in communicating with each other. I also think that, from trying to look kind of critically at my agency, at our role, and the role of other regulators, I think the regulators involved at the WIP facility need to really focus on improving communication with each other. There's over 20 different entities that have some type of regulatory or oversight role with the WIP facility, and each entity, we're focused on the issues that are within our authority, and we're really focusing on just making sure we're doing our job. And I think that the one issue I've seen as a result of the WIP release that has kind of caused me to take pause is the fact that we don't really know what our counterparts are doing. The example I use at the WIP is the MSHA situation, the Mine Safety and Health Administration. They're by law required to do quarterly inspections of WIP, and in about 2008, I forget the exact date, I don't have it in front of me, but a number of years ago, the Mine Safety and Health Administration stopped doing their quarterly mine safety inspections at the WIP facility. And I think MSHA, what their reason was that they didn't believe WIP was a mine. And you know, WIP is unique. It's not a mine, but it's mine-like. And more importantly, by law, they're required to do these inspections. It was not until after the release occurred that we identified that MSHA hadn't done a mine safety inspection at the WIP in a number of years. And I think that example kind of spoke to me of kind of a silo effect that I believe was occurring at the WIP facility, where there's so many different people each with a kind of discrete piece of the puzzle here, that sometimes you start focusing on your little piece of the puzzle, and overall there's a lack of accountability in making sure that everyone is doing their job. And so I think that's something that I've been working with people down in Carlsbad, as well as talking to some of the other regulatory agencies on developing a strategy for breaking down that silo effect across that occurs across the different regulatory entities. So those are some of the communication improvements that I think that need to occur. I also think finally that funding for the WIP recovery is another kind of key piece of the puzzle. One thing I said down in New Orleans to the DOE officials, and I'm going to continue to say every time I'm asked, or even when I'm not asked, regarding the funding, is that I really have a problem with funding for the WIP recovery being taken out of the environmental cleanup budget at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I think from, I'm not trying to put my counterparts from LANL, they have to follow orders. But at headquarters, certainly, at the Department of Energy headquarters, I certainly think that their kind of idea is that, the breached container came from Los Alamos, therefore Los Alamos should bear some of the responsibility for funding the WIP recovery. So kind of like you broke it, you buy it. And, on one hand, I understand that logic, but I really disagree with it, and I don't think it's compelling, because what you're doing, when you take money away from the Los Alamos cleanup budget, you're not punishing necessarily the laboratory. What you're really doing is punishing the state, because work that has been, the money that's been appropriated to do work for the state, which is what the cleanup work is doing, is it's restoring the state's land, it's restoring the environment for the public, is being diverted away from the state. And obviously there's secondary problems as well, because that means there's work that people, subcontractors, contractors, people, small businesses who would be otherwise doing that work if that money was not diverted, that they won't get to. But my primary issue is not necessarily, I'm cognizant of economic impacts of diverting budget, but my focus as the chief regulator for the environment in the state of New Mexico is on the impact to the environment and on the pace at which we're able to clean up all the different sites around Los Alamos that need to be cleaned up. So I've shared that with headquarters, and I'll continue to share that's something that's extremely important for me as we move forward, that money from Los Alamos should not be diverted to support the WIP recovery. I believe the WIP recovery will absolutely need to be fully funded. I support providing full funding for the WIP recovery, but I just don't think the state of New Mexico should be punished for mistakes that have been made by the Department of Energy or their contractors. I think that states also really need to, this is an area where when I mentioned about states communicating better with each other, states need to also work with each other to address priorities, especially when it comes to funding. A couple of years ago when we were really making a lot of outstanding progress that was made, and that I think we're obviously not talking about because this WIP issue is so serious, but there was a lot of great cleanup work that has occurred over the past couple of years. And after the sequestration occurred and we were really strapped, the Los Alamos budget was forced to, they were under the continuing resolution, and then they had the sequestration come in the third or fourth quarter of the fiscal year. We're in a really tight spot to be able to make sure we continued the pace that we had established to maintain the cleanup. And when we were, I think Pete can speak to it better than I could, but they were really running out of money in a matter of weeks. And at that time, there was an initial attempt to move some money to Los Alamos so that they wouldn't have to stop the cleanup. And the state of Washington, their congressional delegation blocked that original attempt to move some money to Los Alamos. And it was, really bothered me because Washington gets over $2 billion for their environmental cleanup budget. And a very small amount of money was going to come to Los Alamos that would have a huge difference on our site. Whereas, $25, $30 million is not really going to make or break the Hanford cleanup. But it was going to have a huge impact on New Mexico and what we were doing up here in Los Alamos. And Washington blocked that, and their kind of attitude was, if there's any money out there, we should get it. And we were fortunate in that through hard work from Governor Martinez, our congressional delegation, Senator Udall was also, his office was also very instrumental. We were able to get money then reprogrammed, and we had good leadership that was able to get it done eventually to get that money there. But it just always rubbed me the wrong way when another state who gets, by orders of magnitude, more money than New Mexico for cleanup, and more importantly, who has waste that they've publicly said they want to send down to the WIP facility, would block money coming into New Mexico that would have a real impact here. And I just thought that's always kind of struck me as something that I didn't think it was very diplomatic. I think that states need to do a better job communicating with each other. And before Washington would have kind of blocked money coming in from us, I would have liked to have been able to tell them exactly what impact that would have. And we were fortunate that like I said, Governor Martinez, our congressional delegation, especially Senator Udall, that we were able to get the money eventually. But that was troubling, especially when Washington is saying how much they want to send some of their waste down to New Mexico, that they would take actions that I think would frustrate our cleanup goals in New Mexico. So I think that states need to work together when it comes to funding. It's a zero-sum game to kind of constantly fight against each other. New Mexico, we obviously were in a very strong position because of the seniority of Senator Domenici and Senator Bingaman, and a lot of money was coming to the state previously, given the tenure that they've been in Congress so long, they were able to really address a lot of our needs. But Senator Bingaman and Senator Domenici were also very good at making sure other states' needs were met. And I think that we need to, I think our delegation is collaborative. I think Governor Martinez certainly wants to collaborate and work with other states, but they need to meet us halfway, and they need to really help understand what our needs are and be willing to work with us. So those are some of the key issues moving forward that I've identified. I find it closed by just talking about some of our investigation. I've received a lot of questions about some of the work that the Environment Department is doing in terms of investigating the issues and potential compliance actions. I think there are, from a regulatory perspective, issues that have been identified. Los Alamos has, to their credit, self-disclosed some of the issues they've uncovered, which I think certainly generates goodwill from the state's perspective. But we will, at the appropriate time, take the appropriate action. I'm not really in a position today to comment on when that will occur and what that will look like. But we take our role as the regulator very seriously, and certainly, given some of the things that we've discovered in our investigation, which is ongoing, there are some deficiencies that we're obviously very concerned about, and we will take the appropriate regulatory action in the near future. But again, regulating, I think that, in my perspective as a regulator, it's really easy to find somebody, issue a press release, and for them to then cut you a check, and nothing ever happens. The hard part is actually figuring out what the fixes are and then implementing those actions, getting those those actions on the ground, getting the processes changed, getting personnel retrained, getting permit provisions modified, fixed. That takes time, that takes real work, real collaboration, and that's what's going to be most important here, is not just issuing a fine or and a press release. That might make people happy politically, might get an article or two in the paper, but that doesn't really do anything to protect the public. The real way you fix these problems is by implementing meaningful corrective actions and then ensuring that those actions are revisited. Finally, I just finished by, I read an article in the Santa Fe New Mexican on Sunday, and one of the subheadings was that there's been lax state oversight, and I think that's just completely false. And I think that suggesting that is not only irresponsible, but it's just flat out wrong. And some of the things that were apparently cited were the fact that there were permit modifications that have occurred for the WIP permit. Well, there's been 124 permit modifications since the permit was issued in 1999. I'm a regulator. I work for Governor Martinez, very proud to work for Governor Martinez. I'm a Republican who's in charge of regulating the environment. It's a tough gig. The first reaction, though, playing this game of Republicans are bad for the environment, Democrats are good, is a joke. I think it might be good for an environmental group to go raise some money and to get people really angry, but it doesn't actually help fix any of the problems. And I think Democrats get upset when someone says Democrats are weak on national security, or Democrats don't care about protecting or supporting the military, and Republicans do. I also think that's garbage. Painting in these broad stripes or broad strokes about whether one party is better at one thing than another, all it does is divide people. The fact of the matter is New Mexico has Republicans, Democrats, independents, people of all different political persuasions. I represent the state of New Mexico. I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat or a Green Party. That my job isn't to pick a side. My job is to represent the state of New Mexico. Perception that somehow there's lax oversight when there's a Republican administration in charge, I would challenge you to give me facts to support that. Under this Republican administration, we've fined polluters over $30 million. I've agreed to some of the largest settlements in the history of the state as the general counsel. Personally, I've done that. We take our job regulating WIP and Los Alamos very seriously. I think they could tell you how seriously we take it. I don't think I think trying to suggest that a permit modification means we've been lax on oversight. Well, where were you when the other 100 permit modifications were approved during the Richardson administration? Were you saying they were lax on oversight then? Maybe you were, but it's one of those arguments that's a political argument. Maybe it scratches an itch to appeal to some fundraising, but it's not based on any type of reality. Permits are living documents. You issue a permit for a limited period of time, then you renew the permit. You change permits. The approved technology, the approved procedures in 1999 are going to be different than they are today. And that's because we gather more information, we understand more about the site, more about the waste we're dealing with, technological improvements are made, and we make appropriate modifications. So you're always going to, for every single permit we issue, we consider them living documents, and you make changes to reflect improvements in technology, improvements in information, and circumstances on the ground. The New Mexican also mentioned, which was very interesting, that the Environment Department didn't perform audits. And first of all, again, Environment Department, we don't do the audits. So the audits are performed by a contractor hired by the Department of Energy. More importantly, though, the audit would not have uncovered the problem that occurred here. So, and that was, the author of the article actually wrote us an email and said he had a sentence that said that, and his editors cut it out in the final story that actually made it there. But the audit processes did occur. They are performed by DOE's contractor. I'm not saying that the audit process does not need to be improved. I'm not saying that there aren't areas in the permit that was issued in 1999 that we're not going to take a very close look at and consider making appropriate changes. I'm definitely not saying any of that. But to try to, I do take umbrage to the suggestion that somehow we've lowered standards, and that by lowering those standards, that has a correlation with what occurred here. I'm the toughest critic on myself. My secretary told me today that I'm getting gray hair, and she said Pete also didn't have any gray hair when he took the job, and he had gray hair by the end of his tenure, and I'm on my way to having, she told me, nice gray hair like Pete over there.
It's a true story, Mr.
But I'm my toughest critic. I've looked very closely, and I've really put a lot of pressure on my staff to look at what do we need to do. I mean, I'm certainly willing to step up and take ownership of weaknesses that we've identified. And I think we certainly think there are areas in the existing permit that we're going to look very closely at improving. But I've seen nothing, and there's no evidence to indicate that any of the decisions we've made, had we made a different decision, that we would have caught the waste issue that occurred that led to the container to be breached. And if I find evidence to the contrary, I'll be the first one to come out and own it. But there's nothing we've seen to suggest otherwise so far. But that's not saying that, again, we're going to continue to investigate. We're going to look closely at what the Department of Energy is doing. We're going to look closely at what we're doing. And we're going to make sure that when that man or woman goes to work down at that mine, or when that man or woman goes to work up at Los Alamos to treat this waste, that they can feel confident that they're going to be able to come home at night, and that they're not going to be exposed to an issue, and that the public is not going to be exposed to a container breach. That's our job. And like I said in the beginning, I have not lost sight of the fact that this occurred at 11:14 at night. If this occurred when the container was being stored outside up at Los Alamos, we'd be having a very different conversation today. If this occurred while there was a full shift going on, we'd be having a very different conversation today. I'm not saying we're lucky that it occurred, but I am saying that I understand, I'm fully aware of the stakes involved in this enterprise. Take that very seriously, and I think everyone needs to take that very seriously, and we need to be guided that as we move forward. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about my presentation. I didn't give you any slides. I apologize in advance. I've been a little busy preparing for my budget hearing tomorrow, so I couldn't.
Secretary Ryan, we appreciate your comments here and what you've told us. But at this time, we have a public comment period. It is now 4:45, basically. And so we'd like to have people hold their questions for you.
Sure.
And if we revert to the public comment, if people would like to make a public comment to us at this time, if you would come forward and state your name and for the record, and state what the concern is, we'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the CAB. My name is Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch New Mexico. I want to thank everyone for the updates today. I would like to say I would kind of appreciate Secretary Flynn's comments, and I already had mine written down, but I'm going to say them anyway. The RDX and the MDAL work that we saw pictures of are consent order items. So we appreciate the fact that there is other work going on at the laboratory on the consent order items, and we, Nuclear Watch New Mexico, wants to push for the continued funding for these consent order items at the laboratory. We can't let the cleanup stop because, somebody made mistakes, and we want to, we want to continue to address the cleanup order the consent order items. There's many investigations, there's many monitoring wells. We still need to gather all the information so we have a total view of the work that needs to be done at Los Alamos. And this cannot suffer because of the true waste program or recovery at WIP. We need to see a revised plan for cleanup at the laboratory, total cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We appreciate those comments. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board during this public comment period? Well, there
seeing no further comment from the public, we'd like to go ahead and have questions for Secretary Ryan. I see that Steve has some. And Carlos also. Okay.
Yes, my question was, you mentioned, and it's been mentioned in the news, there might be some possibility of fines being levied. And I wondered what would happen to those fines? That is there a possibility those fines would in some way be used to advance the cleanup or prevent those kind of problems from happening again, not just going into the general state coffers?
I think that's exactly where they should go. The money should not go. Money's been appropriated to do work up in Los Alamos. Finding the lab, the same argument regarding having money diverted from the cleanup budget to pay for the WIP recovery, I think applies to having money diverted to pay for the fine as well. So I think that we're talking about I'm talking about a fine that hasn't even been issued. So I think we'll have to kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. But just speaking kind of hypothetically and conceptually, I completely agree that there needs to be work done to ensure that any penalties do not compromise the pace of the cleanup and the work that needs to be done up at Los Alamos. I think there's ways to do it too. I think there's strategies that can be put in place to do that. I think that this is something that I was talking about with others when recently with some members of some local government officials, some of your colleagues, regarding strategies to either through federal legislation or a rider to an appropriation bill that could actually specify that funding to pay any type of penalties would not come from a budget. So I think that's one potential strategy. There's also ways that as the regulator you can provide incentives for the person you're regulating to take meaningful actions, and if they actually are able to perform those actions, you can abate portions of the fine as a reward for completing those corrective actions. So I think that's another strategy rather than you kind of suggested, so I'm not sure we're agreeing, but I hope we are, that just writing a check and having the money that was dedicated to go toward doing work up in Los Alamos just go right into the general fund. I think that's a bad idea. I'm not sure where you were coming at it, but I don't support that, and I would not support that going forward. One of the things that Department of Energy, that the Deputy Secretary David Klaus said down at this conference in New Orleans, he told all of us in the audience that, basically that you shouldn't fine us. If you fine us, you're only hurting yourselves. And as a regulator, it's kind of ridiculous for me to sit there, because otherwise I might as well not even be here. And what that's saying is that you really don't understand what it means to be regulated and how the relationship works. And I kind of laughed when I heard that comment, and I met with David Klaus right afterward and said, that's crazy. Of course, like if you're saying that we can't ever hold you accountable, then you're saying that you have no accountability, that you can't be regulated. And that's just that no state would accept that, and I wouldn't accept that either. But you got to figure out enforcement and finding. Those are all things that the whole goal is to implement corrective actions, not just to write a check.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate particularly your kind of looking at the best way to do this and putting a lot of thought into it. So I fully support that idea.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Ryan. Carlos, you had a question for Secretary?
Thanks,
Glenn,
Mr. Chairman.
Ryan, I've been called a lot worse.
Ryan.
If you read the Santa Fe report, they called me a lot worse last week. So you can call me Secretary Ryan, Secretary Flynn, whatever you want.
I apologize.
Thanks for joining us, Ryan. I got maybe 3 questions here. In terms of the order on consent, where are we with that? Is your office met or thought about meeting with the Department of Energy on reestablishing some milestones on that?
Are there new timeframes that you're looking at on the consent order? I know it's still a living document,
So
or are you looking at that deliverable by deliverable?
We need to address the consent order. The current, we haven't made any changes, we have not made any changes to the existing consent order. Going forward, we're going to have to look at the schedule. I think our position has not changed over the past couple of years, in that we understand that the schedule that was originally negotiated in 2005, that's in the current consent order, is not going to be achieved. Department of Energy, I give them a lot of credit for, they acknowledged that 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It's all running together. But they came out publicly and admitted that, and I thought that was a good step forward, just acknowledging what we knew, which was that they weren't going to complete the cleanup by December 31st, 2015. We haven't tackled making changes to that consent order yet, but we do recognize that the schedule is going to need to be retooled. And I think that's a discussion that once we do begin having it, it's a discussion that needs to be done in a transparent fashion so that the public is able to provide input and we're able to move forward. We have to be realistic about the amount of time that it's going to take to do the work. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and depending on what type of remedies are selected for certain portions of the cleanup work that's required in the consent order, the time periods for completing that work is also going to vary. Cleaning up a groundwater contamination too is going to continue to be that's not a 2 or 3 year scenario. I mean, groundwater contamination cleanups take a long time. So I think we're going to have to, at the right time, the right time is not yet. We're really actively working on, I've only got so many people and so many resources, so our focus right now is on actively investigating the situation at Lannel and WIP and really working through implementing corrective actions to ensure that waste is being properly stored, safely and properly stored. But I anticipate that in the spring we'll begin, after the legislative session ends, probably in the April timeframe, we'll sit down and start having discussions, again, in a public manner regarding the schedule. When we do talk about the consent order, the scope of work will not change. It cannot change. So we're not talking about renegotiating what work they'll do and what work they won't do. That scope of work has been established. We're really focusing on schedule. I like the idea of campaigns that we previously discussed. I think that really having a logical sequence and grouping of the work makes a lot of sense. I think it also helps get momentum, not only from just an operational standpoint, getting the people to mobilize and do the work and understand what they're doing, but it also helps appropriators see what they're paying for. And so when you work through, if we group the work together in a logical fashion and come up with a schedule, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's something I'm very interested in looking at when we start talking about scheduling. And I like the idea. It's nice when you can come back to the appropriators and say, look, the past 3 years, this is the amount of money you put into New Mexico, and then you can articulate, this is exactly what you got. This is the work we completed, and now we're moving on to this new campaign or series of work that we're focusing on. So I like that approach. In terms of where we are right now, we've talked to Los Alamos regarding the Environment Department's set deliverables under the current consent order for work that's required over the next year. We've also instructed the Department of Energy to continue to focus on groundwater contamination as a top priority for the state. I believe that the chromium contamination is a top priority, and we've asked them to continue to take as we're looking at today and the short term here, to continue to really focus on mitigating the existing groundwater contamination in the area. So those are our kind of near-term focus. That work is currently, we've set the deliverables for this year under the consent order, and at the appropriate time, we're not there right now given these other events, but at the appropriate time, I think in the next 5-6 months, we'll sit down and really start working on revising a schedule for the consent order. But again, we're not going to touch the scope of work. That doesn't change. It's just a schedule.
Okay, in terms of certifications, recertifications, permitting or re-permitting surrounding WIP, where does that stand right now? Is everything pretty much put on hold? I know that Hanford was looking at moving some waste, I think it was liquid waste, to WIP. I know that mercury storage was being looked at for WIP. That was greater than Class C. There was, I'm guessing, quite a few certifications or recertifications or permitting. Does all that just get put on hold, or is DOE looking at different options for all of that?
So, so what you're talking about various, some of the things that have been discussed would require, they're actually beyond our permitting authority. They would require permitting action, but they'd also require actually federal legislation in terms of if the, by the Land Withdrawal Act. Do I get the name right?
Yeah, the WIP Land Withdrawal Act.
The WIP Land Withdrawal Act governs the type of waste that can be legally disposed of at the facility. So in order to do some of the discussions on things like greater than Class C, I believe that would require federal legislation to actually make that change. I'm not really sure where that stands right now. You'd have to speak, the congressional delegation would probably be in a better position to answer that question. I would imagine that Congress is sitting there saying the WIP is shut down, so I think that they wouldn't entertain legislation regarding expanding the mission of the WIP when it's currently unable to fulfill its existing mission. In terms of permitting, no, there are certain waste streams that are permitted to come to Los Alamos. There are other waste streams that would be legally able to come to Los Alamos, to the WIP. There are other waste streams that do meet the requirements of the Land Withdrawal Act that are defense-related transuranic waste, but that would require a permit modification in order to allow that waste to be disposed of at the WIP. And that's an area that I certainly have control over. I'm not willing to talk about taking on additional waste to the WIP at this right now. The facility's shut down. We need we need to identify what happened. I mean, right now the priority is let's identify what occurred, and let's implement corrective actions to start moving forward. If we later down the road, when we've identified the problem, we've implemented corrective actions, the facility is back up and running, absolutely be willing to consider, I don't control if someone submits a permit modification request, so anyone can submit something to me. I control whether we grant it or not. I would not be inclined, so I don't know who would submit anything to me, and I have no control over that. I would not be inclined to grant any permit modification requests related to taking additional waste streams to the WIP facility, given its current state right now. I think it would be irresponsible to start taking on additional waste underground at the WIP when we haven't even, agreeing to take on additional waste underground at the WIP when we haven't even been able to definitively identify what caused the breach to occur and been able to implement the appropriate corrective actions.
Okay, speaking of that, as I understand it, panel 6 is full. There's nothing else that can go on panel 6. So why not close panel 6? And I think you had issued an order to get that done. And I understand that you want to figure out what happened, cause first, before anything else happens down at WIP. But what can we possibly learn from panel 6? Don't we have enough containers above ground?
It needs to be closed. My order said close it, and I want it closed by the end of this year. I don't know, I was giving JR's bosses a lot of grief about this in New Orleans. I wanted it closed a while ago, and I'm losing my patience with the time it's taking to close panel 6. There's no, they've just started bolting. They've got to maintain the integrity of the mine before they put any workers underground. They just got the waste hoist back operational, so hopefully they're now in a position to actually begin moving on it. But you're preaching to the choir. I'm 100% with you. Why? I don't know if JR can answer it. But his bosses weren't giving me a good answer last week about why we haven't closed panel 6 yet, so.
I don't know that I can give you a better answer than my bosses, but as I said in my presentation, it is a priority for us as soon as we can reestablish the integrity of the mine and we can get the appropriate number of workers in a position where they can work in there safely. And so it is a priority. We're doing the roof bolting. We started that. It's going to go on for a while. We do have the waste hoist back in operation, so we can allow more workers in the mine. So we're heading in that direction, and hopefully we'll be starting on it soon. We're starting to stage materials for that particular operation. But putting the mine in a safe configuration and ensuring that in the event of an accident we can get people out safely is our number one priority. And so we're going to proceed in that direction at the pace in which we can do it with comfort, knowing that it's a goal, and we've been hearing for months that message. He's been consistent with that, and so we're going to honor that as soon as we practically can.
One last question, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but Ryan, how do you feel about the recovery plan that has been implemented for WIP? Is it sufficient? Are they moving fast enough?
I think right now it's just a plan, and so you need a plan. It's better to have a plan and then change the plan than it is to just kind of react. But there's still a lot of unknowns, and the plan is going to have to evolve as we move forward and more information is gathered, we understand more. And I think DOE, JR would probably agree with me on that I think it's a plan, it's an initial plan, but I think everyone understands that the plan is going to continue to evolve as we move forward, we get more information, and we make more progress. I do think that spent a lot of time with Jim Blankenhorn now, who works down in Carlsbad, and he's kind of the number 2 person at the site from the contractor's perspective, I believe, who's the guy charged. He's the quarterback. He's running the show on the recovery plan. I'm impressed with Jim Blankenhorn. I think he's I think the Nuclear Waste Partners, NWP, after this occurred, obviously was a huge issue for them, and I think they brought their varsity team in and brought in people that would be able to really solve problems. I would have liked to have the varsity team there all along. Maybe we wouldn't be in this situation, but I do think that that Blankenhorn is a stand-up guy. I think he's very smart, action-oriented. He's a general in the Army, and he's a reservist, so he understands logistics. He understands how to work with the regulator. So I think that they're making a lot of progress. I'm not happy with the pace, but I'm never going to be happy with the pace that they're moving at down there, just because they don't move fast. It's taken, like the panel 6 is a good example. I would have liked panel 6 to be closed by now, and it's not, and it's taking too long. But I appreciate the justification. You can't put someone down there without ensuring that they're going to be able to come up, and so the safety of the workers needs to be paramount in making these decisions. So I have no problem with the manner in which they're proceeding. I do get frustrated sometimes in that I think that headquarters at DOE in Washington, D.C. micromanages a lot of the decisions that go on. And I think that some of the people at the site who wouldn't, they wouldn't say it, but I think it's the truth is that they're not empowered to make a lot of the decisions they need to make in order to get things done more efficiently. So I do wish that DOE would actually would give more authority to the Carlsbad field office to allow them to make more decisions and to move more efficiently. I think that would help matters along a lot. I also think that if you look around at the Department of Energy, and I don't anticipate this is going to improve, unfortunately, for the next 2 years, there's so many vacancies all across kind of the management chain right now. And I think Congress is partially to blame for that. They're not confirming people. President Obama appoints his people, and if they're qualified, they should be allowed to do their job. So he won. Public, just like Governor Martinez, she won. I mean, the public has spoken. They should be allowed to put the people in the jobs that they think are appropriate, as long as they're qualified. And I think that the vacancy rate across the DOE, if you look at their org chart, that plays a big role in some of the difficulty getting decisions made, because a lot of people are acting, or the position's just vacant, and there's just general fear that if I make this decision and before my new boss comes in, I'm kind of putting myself out there on a ledge, and I might make a decision today that I think is right, and then a month from now a new boss comes in and they disagree with that decision, and they're saying, who's the idiot that made this decision? And they're looking at the person and saying, you're out of here. So I think that having all those vacancies, it creates a lot of uncertainty, and it makes people scared to make decisions. So I think that there is the appropriate caution being taken by the people at the site and WIP to be cautious and to protect workers, and I think that is absolutely the correct approach. But I do think there's also the communication between the field office and headquarters is very slow, and part of that's because headquarters is managing a lot more at the site than probably they need to, and also because there's a lot of vacancies across the management chain.
I thought that was my last question, but you spurred on another one. I guess now that NNSA has been taken out of the equation up in Los Alamos and cleanup is pretty much all going to EM, is that going to help matters move along quicker?
I hope so. I hope that NSA is not out of the equation. They're still here. Pete's here. He's at NSA. He's real. So but you're right. They're going through the transition. I haven't. Well, actually, I just saw someone sent me a copy of a preliminary transition document. So, Pete would be in a much better position to kind of talk through transition. My hope is that having EM, whose mission it is to do environmental cleanup, and who's been actually funding the environmental cleanup that NNSA has been doing, having EM in charge of environmental remediation up at Los Alamos will mark an improvement. And that's not a knock on Pete or any of the men and women at NNSA that are currently up there doing the work. I have a lot of respect for them and the work they're doing. I believe, they live here, they care about the state, they want to do a good job. It's not in any way reflective of kind of their priorities, but I do think they work for an organization who, NNSA, their priority is not environmental cleanup. Their priority is, managing the nuclear weapons stockpile, and environmental cleanup is kind of a very, it's not given the same degree of priority. Whereas EM, their priority is environmental cleanup. So I do hope that moving the cleanup to a division within DOE that's really focused on environmental cleanup will help. But it's really going to depend on how they manage the transition and funding, and then on how what they do when they are given the keys to the car. If it's just same system, same priorities, same vision with an EM label on it, then I'm not sure if anything will change. But if there's a new vision, a new approach, new perspective from the EM people, then I think there's an opportunity for there to be a lot of improvement.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Carlos. I have one question, Secretary Flynn. You indicated a possibility of a report from NMED in the beginning of when we had the discussion. Do you expect that to be out sometime after the first of the year?
Well, I think what I was referencing was, we investigate, and the culmination of our investigation is would be a compliance orders. There's no time frame on those. I think that it's So I would anticipate that there would be a resolution to some of the compliance action, or we will take some sort of action by the end of this year. But yeah, I don't want to commit to a specific date, but I think it's coming sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
They're on my desk, but they're being reviewed as we speak.
Very
So
good.
I was doing that before I came here.
Are there any other questions for Secretary Flynn? Okay. Being that, we'll move on, but we certainly appreciate you coming and being very forthright with the comments, and we appreciate
Thanks.
that very much.
Thanks for having me.
We'll now get to the third part of this, the B part, update from the Department of Energy. Pete Majori. Pete?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Secretary Flynn, members of the board, I'll promise to keep this brief for any number of reasons. First of all, I just wanted to acknowledge and welcome Randy Erickson to the board and as ex officio. And Randy and I got to know each other. I think the first time we met was the night the breach drum was identified, and we spent some quality time at TA 63 together long into the evening with the laboratory director, and have continued to spend a lot of time together. And I had a lot of confidence in Randy. Look forward to working with Randy. I think you're going to be a real asset to the laboratory, to the cab. I don't know if Michael Brandt is still here. Michael, I just want to give you a shout out as well. For those of you who don't know Michael Brandt, Michael and Randy and I have kind of formed this triad that meets weekly we meet every week for an hour at Starbucks. I won't tell you what time because it's small and we won't get a table if everybody shows up. We make a point of having a weekly tag-up meeting with an agenda to try and make sure that some of the communication issues the Secretary has referred to you that were not optimal in the past are optimized, and that everybody who should know what we're doing knows what we're doing. And I look forward to working with both Michael and Randy as we move forward through this recovery process. Real briefly, talk about the budget. I wish I had more that I could share. The continuing resolution goes through December 11th. I just came back from Washington, D.C. this morning, and it seems like whatever street corner you stand on and whoever you listen to, you can hear a different story about what might be expected. Conventional wisdom right now that I'm hearing is one of two options. One is a continuing resolution in the longer term. Another is an omnibus appropriation. I'm not smart enough to know the difference between the two, or what has the higher probability. The Senate mark is still at 225. The House mark is at 180 for the Lano cleanup. And hopefully we'll wake up on December 12th and have something under the early Christmas tree that will be more akin to the President's request and enable us to do a lot of the environmental cleanup work that I think many of you here in the board and the audience and Secretary Flynn certainly would like us to do. The fiscal year 16 budget numbers are still embargoed, and I can get into a lot of trouble even implying what those might be, so I apologize for that, but that's the status of the 16 budget. We talked a little bit about 15, what we're going to do. Every year, the Department of Energy, Los Alamos, goes down, meets with the Secretary and his staff to try and figure out what we're going to do, what work we're going to execute in the upcoming fiscal year. The fiscal year started October 1st, and we still haven't paid the Secretary and his staff a visit yet. We hope to pay that visit tomorrow. One of the reasons we've delayed it is quite candidly because of the budget, and quite candidly because of some of the things that the Secretary mentioned are coming out of the Lano cleanup budget that the Secretary indicated he would prefer not to see come out of that budget. But be that as it may, we're going to lay all the cards on the table. He'll know what we know, and hopefully we can negotiate a risk-based priority for work execution and do as much as we possibly can moving through FY 15. Secretary mentioned focusing on chromium. We share a very common vision there. We're also hoping to focus on stormwater protection monitoring, groundwater protection, have some work we need to do with our federal EPA permit, which Secretary Flynn's department doesn't regulate directly, but it interfaces and integrates very closely with the work that the Environment Department does. On the true side of the equation, we're obviously have scaled back a lot, but we have to get the nitrate salt waste processed, and that's going to be a very high priority for us to execute as well. Secretary and others talked briefly about some of our self-disclosures, and I wanted to talk about that briefly as well. We sent correspondence to the Environment Department dated October 21st of this year where we reported additional instances of noncompliance under RCRA, under the hazardous waste permit. Randy and Michael and I and our staffs worked very, very hard on this. These were reported as potential violations applicable to generators under the New Mexico Hazardous Waste Act, which the Environment Department has been delegated authority to administer by US EPA. Three main areas where we fell short I wanted to review very, very briefly. The first was the failure to conduct an adequate hazardous waste determination and apply appropriate hazardous waste numbers. We failed to meet certain requirements for managing and placing waste that was incompatible. We failed to properly label unremediated nitrate salt-based waste-bearing drums with the hazardous waste codes. And then there's sort of a domino effect, because when you use that kind of stuff wrong, a whole bunch of other stuff goes wrong afterwards, and that falls in the area of transportation, pre-transportation, packaging, relabeling, and things like that. So we kind of had three general areas that we self-disclosed, and this was self-disclosure that occurred in addition to an earlier self-disclosure we conducted in the year. It took a while for us to pull the string. RCRA is pretty complicated, as many of you know, and so it takes a while to work through all that. And we think we've worked through it all. We think the Secretary's staff knows what we know now, and now the next step, obviously, is to try and put together a recovery plan. I want to talk a little bit about some work we're doing with relation to the Rio Grande and the Buckman Direct Diversion Board. Mr. Puglisi, I don't know if he's still here, but he had some questions about that. Well, I'll still share it to him. I'll consider him here in spirit. And I've known Alex for many years. We're in the process under the leadership of David Rhodes, who I think is still here in the back, to draft a new MOU. Our original Memorandum of Understanding with the Buckman Direct Diversion Board was for 5 years. It was pretty specific. What we found out after 5 years is, quite candidly, we didn't learn everything we hoped we would learn. We weren't able to collect all the data we wanted to collect. We weren't able to interpret all the data that we collected. It was no fault of our own. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't. Catching the flows at the right time from the right canyons is more of a challenge than it might sound. David and his staff is working very closely with the Buckman board, the board staff, the plant manager, to try and negotiate a new MOU so that we can continue to fulfill the commitment that we made to the board, that we made to Ryan and the governor about protecting surface water quality. It would continue operation of the early notification system, and the system would primarily be on Lanel property. We've had some challenges in the historic operation of the early notification system that gauges and samples stormwater as it leaves Lanel. When it's not on our property, we have some trouble sometimes collecting samples, maintaining it, and particularly when we get 1,000-year floods, even finding the equipment when it washes off our property. So we're working very diligently on that, and I wanted to recognize and appreciate the work that David's done on that. And then finally, there was a brief mention of, I think, Carlos, you talked about the transition of the legacy scope work to the Office of Environmental Management away from the National Nuclear Security Administration, and the transition plan was delivered to Secretary Moniz on Friday. He was briefed earlier this week, and there's a lot of work ongoing. Unfortunately, a lot of that work is procurement sensitive, and I cannot talk about it at this meeting. My hope is that we will be able to talk about it, and we will be able to be transparent absolutely as soon as we can. The Department of Energy looks very favorably upon the CAB as a venue for sharing information, and as soon as we are able to release information that addresses both the source selection aspects, the human capital aspects, I would personally welcome an opportunity to return and to share as much of that information as I can, ideally with representatives from headquarters, so you can hear it directly from the folks back in the Beltway. Several of y'all mentioned the Santa Fe, New Mexican article, and I don't want to dwell on that in any real sense. But what I want to do is just very briefly kind of summarize, and this will be the end of my presentation, some of the work that's ongoing. There's a technical assessment team that's ongoing that's looking at the analytical results. It's working with Randy, with Terry Wallace, who you know, looking at all the analytical work the laboratory has done, doing additional analytical work to bring the best science and scientists that we can bear to try and figure out what happened to answer some of the questions that Secretary Flynn and many others have raised. The Accident Investigation Board work is ongoing. Both of those projects, my understanding, are waiting for Project REACH, which is a very important project, which is going to give us some additional visibility throughout Panel 7. Those are kind of all highly integrated. LANL has conducted an internal review and an external causal analysis. I'm not certain of the status. I don't want to speak for the laboratory. Tremendous amount of work going there. Office of Inspector General has issued a report already. That final report is out. The Office of Enforcement sent a letter to us on November 14th, notifying us that they'll be doing an investigation. And then finally, Secretary Flynn, under his leadership, has indicated, working with Deputy Undersecretary Klaus, the intent to do an independent review. And we fully support that, look forward to working with that. So when you put all that together, there's a lot of eyeballs on what we're doing, and there's going to be a lot of information, there's going to be a lot of reports. I'm not smart enough to know what those are going to conclude and how those are all going to build into corrective action. But I will commit on behalf of NNSA that we'll keep this board as involved as possible, and we'll accept any invitations to return, to present, and to the extent that the information is not privileged, we will be as transparent as possible. So with that, I'd like to conclude, try and get you guys back on track, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Pete. We appreciate you, Brennan. Any other comments or questions from the board to Pete? Okay. First of all, I want to thank the three presenters. The information you gave us, Randy and JR and certainly Secretary Flynn, was very worthwhile. I think we consumed a lot here, and we appreciate that. I also want to thank the three student members for bearing with us through all this. I thought we were doing pretty good about time, but we seem to have extended it a little further than we anticipated, but that you stayed with us and listened to all this. Certainly worthwhile as far as I was concerned, as far as getting the real crux of the story and what's going on.
Mr. Chair, I think after this meeting, they probably deserve probably 4 or 5 credits in civics, college credits for this one.
Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. At this time, I guess we can go ahead with wrap-up comments. And so can we start down with Tessa with wrap-up comments? We appreciate it.
I don't really have any wrap-up comments. I just want to thank everybody for their presentations. They were very informative. I'm sorry. I just want to thank everyone for their presentations. It was very informative. I'm still kind of learning everything about the board, and I'm really happy to be here. It's very informative to know what's going on and figuring out how it applies to my city and my area.
Thank you.
Thank you to the public that came out. Also, thank you for the presentations. Staff, you're always awesome as always.
My thanks to all the presenters today. It was very enjoyable, and with each meeting I get more informed, and very, very enjoyable. Thank you.
Great meeting, and everybody have a great and beautiful Thanksgiving.
A lot of good information. Thank you, Secretary Flynn, and all the other presenters. Appreciate it. And thank you, Manise and staff.
Thank you, Secretary Flynn. Thanks for the information. I'm glad we're on the same track as trying to get some of these things taken care of. I'm glad it's not the NM&ED that's holding these situations up. And have a happy Thanksgiving.
Mr. Chair, Manise, and support personnel, William and Bridget, excellent job. Another engaging meeting. Randy, JR, and Secretary Flynn, excellent presentations. The information, as always, is excellent. The level of transparency, and with that, I'll close with have a happy Thanksgiving.
Carlos?
Very insightful presentations today. Thanks for joining us. Good to meet you, Randy. JR, good to see you again. And Ryan, it's always a pleasure. Christina, best wishes in your future endeavors. Congratulations. Great job, Doug. Looking good up there. And happy holidays to all my friends.
Yeah, have a good teacher.
Thank you. I'm sorry I came in late. It was beyond my control. But thank you to the presenters and for all the great information that you provide. I still, too, feel fairly new to this, but with every meeting I learn a lot. So appreciate it. Thank you, Manise and staff, and happy holidays to everyone.
I'd like to thank the presenters not only for their planned presentation, but also their openness and willingness to answer questions and giving us forthright and clear answers. So I appreciate that. I also wish to thank the support staff. This has been a really well-organized meeting, as they all are, and thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Doug, for acknowledging us students. Deidre held on as long as she could, but she had to run to class. But we get a lot out of this, and so we thank you guys for having us students here so we can really engage in the conversation and hear what's going on. And I particularly want to thank JR and Ryan for coming, because I get to see the Llano perspective all the time, and I really like to hear the whole story. So thank you very much for presenting to us today.
Thank you.
I'm still really new, but every time I come, I learn more. So thank you to everyone who's informing me more every time I come.
I also want to thank the members of the public that came. And of course, Christina, we wish you well, what you're going to do in the future, but we want to see you as much as you can devote to us in the future, as far as time. Thank you. Appreciate staff, getting a well-prepared meeting. Facilities were certainly great. Thank you, Manise, William, and Bridget. It was very good. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Lee.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, this is our final meeting of this calendar year. We will see you in January. And after living through this year, I now understand the ancient Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times. Have a great holiday. Thank you. This meeting is now dismissed.